Ready? Good evening and welcome to the Monday, July 26, 2021 Plan Commission meeting and Commission for Citizen Involvement. I'd like to now call the meeting to order. Iris, would you please call the roll?
Fisher,
Here.
Heap,
Here.
Leek,
Here.
Pepe,
Here.
Phillips,
Here.
Semler,
Here.
Stewart.
Here. Great, thank you. We have a full commission tonight. And we'll note that Vice Chair Pape and Commissioner Fisher are actually joining us through Zoom. So everyone's here. I'd like to move on to our first agenda item, which is a council update. I don't believe we have a council update tonight. So we'll move on to the public comment. This is regarding issues not on the agenda. Iris, was there anybody that indicated they would wish to make a public comment tonight?
No.
So we have none. Next is the Commission for Citizen Involvement, general updates. I didn't have any updates that I wanted to provide tonight. So we'll move on to our first scheduled item on the agenda. This is a public hearing continued. It's Community Development Code and Comprehensive Plan Map and Zoning Map Amendments to the Boones Ferry Road Staging Area, LU 21-0019. The hearing is continued from July 12th, 2021 for deliberations only. There's no public testimony. A request from the City of Lake Oswego for Community Development Code amendments to allow multifamily housing as an allowed use in the WLG-OC zone, limited to the Boones Ferry Road construction staging property, southwest corner of Boones Ferry Road and West Sunset Drive, subject to affordable housing criteria and allowing a 5-foot height increase for multifamily development that is at least 80 feet from all R7.5 zone properties, and amendments to the comprehensive plan map and zoning map to reclassify approximately 0.10 acres from the Westlake Grove RMU to the Westlake Grove OC, and approximately 0.15 acres from WLG-R2.5 to WLG-OC. The properties are located at 5126 and 5110 West Sunset Drive in 16719, 16731, 16745, and 16759 Boone Ferry Road. No actual development is proposed at this time. The staff coordinator is Scot Siegel, Director of Planning and Building Services. So I'd like to start the deliberations tonight. Attorney Boone, would you like to have us poll the commission?
Yes, preliminary matter, Mr. Chair. Just as an abundance of caution and make sure everybody is working with the same evidence, does any commissioner have an ex parte contact to declare any site visit that has occurred since the last meeting, any new bias on the application, or a new financial conflict of interest to declare? Hearing none, thank you. Oh, Commissioner Fisher.
I went through the area. I drove through the area. So I guess that's considered a site visit?
Did you see anything there that was material to the criteria?
No.
Okay. All right. And then Commissioner Simler, you were not present at the last meeting, or when you have not fully reviewed the record. So I understand you will not be participating in this quasi-judicial hearing.
That's correct.
All right. New Commissioner Phillips, I understand you have reviewed the record. You have seen the videotape and reviewed all the written materials, and that you will be participating in tonight's meeting. Is that correct?
That's correct. I've read all the homework that I've gotten, and I've looked at the videos, so I think I've seen everything.
Okay.
And
certainly you can change your mind at any point, but...
right, and if I feel uncomfortable at any point, I'll abstain at the end of it.
You're fully qualified to participate. Thank you very much.
But I'm planning to participate and vote.
All right, thank you. So, Mr. Chair, that takes care of that preliminary matter. The next up, I think you have a procedure, but we have evidentiary questions.
Sure.
Resolve before we move to deliberation. Okay.
Sure. So Attorney Boone, I think the first procedural matter was to ask the commission to strike new written testimony exhibits received after the July 12th deadline from the record. So I'd like to ask the commission to agree or disagree to strike new written testimony exhibits received after the July 12th. Those exhibits were G137, G138, G139, G257, and G260. Is there a motion to strike those new written testimony exhibits received after the July 12th deadline?
And we're striking them because they came in after the deadline, is that?
Correct. They were late.
All right, so moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion on the motion? All right. Just one comment. I was a little concerned. I did look at all the exhibits, and some of them were fairly close. You know, the deadline was at noon, but you know, what kind of swayed me in this decision was that it was published on the website when the cutoff time was. It was announced in the meeting, and then also the submitters were asked if they would have any written response. And for all the exhibits that were striking, there was no response given back for, you know, why it should be considered even though it was late. So I'm comfortable with striking these exhibits from the record due to the lateness. Attorney Boone, is there?
Well, if the commission were to let these in, and the other reason, I guess, you're doing it, is that the people who responded, who did the written rebuttals, only did the written rebuttals to the evidence that was received prior to the record, then if any of these exhibits were to be admitted, then we would have to reopen it so people could file a written rebuttal to these. So just so
Another procedural point.
that
Thank
is the
you for
real reason, right?
Okay. Yeah.
That people should adhere to the deadlines. Okay, so
Sure.
everybody's playing on the same playing field.
Right. Thank you for that good point of clarification. So if there's no further discussion on the motion, then I'd ask for the commission to vote. So all those in favor for striking the late exhibits received? Aye.
Aye.
Commissioner Fisher, I'm not sure, I heard Vice Chair Pape say aye. Commissioner Fisher, we didn't hear you.
Aye.
All right. Any opposed? Any abstains? I think it's unanimous. So the commission recommends or finds that we should strike the late exhibits from the record. Next is a similar question to the commission that there was some testimony that was received and was outside the scope of the written rebuttal evidence. So I'd ask if the commission would like to make a motion to disregard the portion as being part of the record before the commission that was outside of the scope of the written rebuttal.
I make a motion that we strike them.
There's a second.
I'll second it.
I heard Commissioner Fisher, I believe, make the second. Any discussion on the motion?
Just for the record, we're referring to the strikeouts as proposed in the staff memo of July 23rd, no attachments.
Correct, and I believe those exhibit numbers were G261, G264, and G265, and it was the staff's recommendation with the strikeouts that was in the memo, correct?
I have a comment.
Sure.
I'm okay with the procedural part of it, but there's nothing, I didn't read anything in those that I hadn't already thought of myself or heard on the testimony when I observed the last meeting. So I'm fine procedurally with it not being allowed, but there was nothing new in those comments, in my opinion.
Thank you. Commissioners, any other comments? I would acknowledge that on Exhibit G265, as I mentioned prior, that the submitters hadn't provided written responses to why their proposed out-of-scope testimony should be excluded, but we did get one on G265, but that feedback that we got was more of a question. So I didn't, again, see any rationale that was provided for why we would not strike it. So with that, I'd like to vote on the motion to remove from the record the evidence that was out of scope. and it was outlined by the staff memo that was provided. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Commissioner Pepe, Vice Chair Pepe?
Aye.
Commissioner Fisher?
Aye.
Unanimous. Nobody opposed. Nobody abstains. So motion carries. So with that, and then I'd like to move on to reviewing the criteria that the applicant has provided. And to this, I think what we'd like to do is walk through all of the criteria and the findings and apply really a set of filters. There's really 3 filters that I'll outline. As one is, is it uncontested that the criterion is met? Or is the criteria met, but on other grounds that maybe the criterion findings were incorrect, but we find it on other grounds that the criterion was met. The second filter would be that there's an omission of any evidence to show the criteria is met. And then the third would be the criteria where there was conflicting evidence to whether the criteria was met or not. So that's what we're going to be evaluating. We'll go through the criteria and collectively kind of decide on whether the criteria was met or not. And then after that, we will then go to the preliminary findings to decide whether the findings have been met. So with that, I would like to start the deliberation. And I'd like to go to the beginning of the criteria, which is on page 6 of the staff report under the Lake Oswego Community Development Code. In this, it involves the burden of proof, the compliant, mostly the burden of proof, and that if what was required under code had been met.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, that of course is an obligation that you would look at as you look at each of the substantive criteria. So that's the burden that the applicant has when you look at policy A1, policy A2, et cetera, et cetera. So,
Okay. So then we'll move on to the compliance of the comprehensive plan. So commissioners, any comments? Again, the staff's findings here was that the policies were met. Policy A1 mentions that we maintain the land use regulations and standards to promote compatibility, mitigate adverse traffic impacts, provide implementation of adopted neighborhood plans, provide for necessary public facilities, protect life and property, promote architectural and site design quality, increase opportunities for alternate means of transportation. Commissioner Lee.
I'd first like to say that I find this whole rezoning ask is very complex, and it involves the need for affordable housing that our city needs, and it's being pressured by Metro. But in response to specifically Section 4 compliance with the City of Lake Oswego Comprehensive Plan Policies, Land Use A Development Policies, under A1 and maintain land use regulations and standards to promote compatibility between development and existing desired neighborhood character. The response from the applicant says that the use of the site would be subject to the Westlake Grove Design District standards, et cetera. which is true. The look of the project will follow design standards, but I personally find that the density of the proposed complex is not compatible. And I feel as though the Lake Forest Neighborhood Association and other neighborhoods worked with the city for a long time, and that the West Lake Road District standards and the character of it and the uses of it that would be allowed were agreed upon. And therefore, they knew how it would impact their neighborhood, and they agreed upon a plan that would allow commercial and mixed-use residential. They did not agree to high-density residential. And I feel now that the city wants to change because they own the land and they have been pledged millions of dollars of federal COVID money from our congressman towards the project, that this is a good opportunity to provide affordable housing. But I feel this is tantamount to a betrayal of the neighborhood players, and that this high-density residential is not meeting Section B, promote compatibility between development and existing and desired neighborhood character.
Thank you, Commissioner Lee. Commissioner Stewart?
I was also hung up a little bit on that Section B, but I think in the end, my conclusion was the burden of compatibility lies with the persons submitting the development application. What hung me up, I think, a little more was this idea of creating kind of a one-off land use, you know, on a site, right? So we're gonna take an already, what I feel is very complicated overlay zone with a lot of nuances and make it more complicated. And my review of this application then became in the context of, should we be doing this for that site, or should we be applying these new standards to all WLG-OC sites? And that's where I think this gets a little, I mean, I think this can be met, but again, I think it goes to what ultimately the development application shows.
Thank you, Commissioner Stewart. I would like to just check with Vice Chair Pape and Commissioner Fisher if they have any comments. Vice Chair Pape?
No significant comments other than what our other two commissioners just spoke about, and I'm pretty much in agreement and alignment with theirs. The comments they made.
Commissioner Fisher?
Yeah, my hangup is, what is our role as the Planning Commission? I think the kind of complaints and concerns that people are making about its terrible development, it'll hurt our community, I think that needs to wait until there is a specific proposal on the table. At that point, let the I don't think it's the city that's going to build that housing. It's going to be somebody, whether it's the Fair Housing Council or if it's Randy Sebastian's Renaissance Homes, whoever it is, somebody's going to submit a proposal. And at that point, we then have to argue, or the two sides have to present their evidence. I think our role is, did the city meet its statutory responsibility in recommending this zone change? If they did, and I think they did, then I think we need to approve that zone change and then wait to see what development is proposed.
I have a couple comments. Commissioner Lee?
I understand where you're coming from on that. I did a little research, and part of the complication of this zone change, and no one's talking about it because supposedly, as they said in the applicant says, a specific development project has not been proposed as part of this application. Any potential traffic impacts related, blah, blah, blah. But I think that's kicking the can down the road and letting the RDC deal with it, because the big objection to the neighbors that I think that we're not taking into account, we can check all the bureaucratic boxes, this met this criteria, but are we listening to what the neighbors are saying? And what they're saying is, affordable housing, great, but this is just such a small space, and we're putting 53 proposed units, but that's just speculative, except maybe it's not. I have a very good friend, and he's a CPA tax person with a big firm downtown Portland, and we were just having lunch and discussing, what was I doing, what was he doing, and he specializes in putting together these proposals for affordable housing.
Commissioner Leek, if I may interject a point of order and ask to Attorney Boone, is this ex parte contact?
Well, I'm trying to understand what,
Well, here's where I'm going. I was just trying to get information on how are these, no one wants to talk about who is going to develop it, but what he said was, developers won't touch any.
yeah, okay, so that does sound, you're getting information about the process of development outside the scope of this hearing.
It is, but it's germane to approving the zone change, I think,
Well-
because if you approve the zone change and you want a developer to develop it in lieu with the city and the powers and the banks and the affordable housing credits, developers don't want to do anything under 50 units. So thinking that you can go to the DRC and reduce the size of it and still have an affordable housing project may be a moot point, is all I'm saying. You have to look at the whole scope, not just, does this zone change meet all the boxes?
As to whether it's an ex parte contact, you're applying it as a filter for whether.
How I digested this whole thing.
Pardon me?
I used it as, from the very beginning, when I first looked at all of this, I said, why are there 53 units on here? Why are we putting so many in this small space? It was always never addressed, it's just a proposed unit. But somehow, was it really a proposed unit or something that really they'll be able to later say, well, we said it could be 53.
Right. Well, so that is information, obviously, that you've researched in a conversation outside the scope of the hearing, because you felt it was not in the hearing to answer your
Well,
question.
no one would answer that question.
Right. So, okay, I'm not saying yes or no, but I'm just trying to categorize it. It was information that you felt you needed that was outside the scope of the hearing. Okay.
It just kind of happened as we were having lunch and discussing. I didn't call him up and say, I have to.
No, but that's okay. Sometimes ex parte information is thrown upon you, okay? And the obligation is to declare it during the hearing process so the parties have an opportunity to respond to it. So here we are at the deliberation stage with your declaration of an ex parte
So I should
communication.
have brought this to everyone's attention previous.
Yes, yeah. So either we're going to, I think, reopen the hearing so that people can respond to the additional information, or you would set aside that information in your deliberation. So that's the two ways, I think, to cure it.
I'm having trouble putting it aside because I've had sleepless nights over this issue. And when I heard that, it kind of the puzzle pieces came together. And maybe they aren't the right puzzle pieces, but I think you can't look at a zone change that the DRC maybe down the road will say, well, developer says you can't make it pencil out with 35 units, so it has to be 53. And that information wasn't brought to the fore.
Okay, but your obligation in a quasi-judicial hearing is not to go out and find the answer. That's the challenge. Because all the parties in a quasi-judicial hearing are supposed to know what evidence is being presented to you so they can respond to it. Okay, that's the challenge.
I get that, but I
Okay.
feel that maybe evidence wasn't explicitly given to us.
Well,
I'll
okay.
save you all a little bit of time here. There is evidence in the record, and it was we asked the commission to take administrative notice of the memorandum of understanding that the city entered into with Metro and the Housing Authority of Clackamas County. That is in the record, and that does specify an aspirational goal of approximately 50 housing units, and that is the basis on which, part of the basis on which the request was made.
Okay, so
So you're
aspiration.
not, that information is in the record, so
Okay.
you don't have to rely on what you've heard outside the hearing.
Yeah, so So if you can set aside what you heard outside the hearing and refer to the evidence in the hearing, then we can,
I can set that aside now, knowing that somewhere in this morass of paperwork and this is and that's, that it's there and is not public knowledge.
well, it's in the record, so
Okay.
it's public knowledge.
Okay.
To that degree.
Then I just want to reiterate that public knowledge.
Okay. All right, so you're setting that aside. All right, thank you.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Phillips.
I got a couple of questions, and if they're in the record, just tell me, and I missed them, but I approach things procedurally, I want to do things correct, but at the end of the day, my vote's going to depend on whether I believe this is the right thing to do for the city and the people. Okay, so with that said, I've got a question that the city apparently has not been able to find land that would be suitable to be zoned for affordable housing for over a decade. Is that correct? I read that.
Well, we'll go on your recollection of the
Okay,
evidence.
okay, so it's been a while in any case, okay? So now the city has bought this property for a purpose to do construction on the road. Can you guys hear me? Everybody can hear me okay? My voice usually doesn't need a microphone, but, so
Great.
they bought the land for a purpose and now they're done with that. We're wrapping up the street construction and they've now decided they'd like to designate this, rightfully or wrongly, I don't know, for use as possible use as affordable housing. But it's being zoned that other things can be done there, correct?
Correct, this is
Okay,
additional.
so let's say after if we vote to rezone this to go for having affordable housing as one of the potential uses, a developer, builder, whatever you call them around here, they come in and they say, well, we want to build an office building or something. Does the city still, this is the question, does the city still at that point own the land and they will only sell it if they get the type of project they want?
Well, I guess I would say two things. One, the ownership of the land is not the question. The question is the use of the land. That's what the proposed amendments are, relative to the use of the land.
Right.
This would allow an additional use. It does not foreclose the existing uses. So as any property owner, they would have to use the property consistent with the uses of the land. So you're only authorizing use of land. And what
Okay, so a developer comes in and says, I want to build an office complex. Does the city still own the property at that point?
well, until the city sells the city owns the property.
Okay, so they don't necessarily have to agree to sell the property if they don't like what they're going to build on it. Is that fair enough? The city wants to put affordable housing. That's in the record, okay? But it's being zoned for other things. And I'm trying to find out, is the only thing that's acceptable on here is affordable housing or not? I can't find that anywhere.
Well, again, the question before the commission is whether or not this application, which proposes to allow an additional use on the property, meets the policies and standards in the comprehensive plan. That's the question.
Okay.
If the additional use does.
You've answered my question, okay? I understand the situation now. So, okay, second question.
Commissioner Phillips, if I may interject?
I'm sorry?
If I may interject?
Okay,
Sorry.
please.
I just wanted to echo what Attorney Boone said. I think, to stay focused tonight, as I outlined in the beginning of the meeting, we're really going to go through and look at two questions. It's going to be evaluating the criteria and then determining if that specific criteria, that's what we're being asked to look at, if the criteria is met. And there's really some filters that we can apply, whether it's uncontested, that we just agree the criterion and we don't have to have any discussion, whether the criterion is incorrect, but it's met, we feel it's met on other grounds, or if there's omission of any evidence to show that the criteria is met. So we don't believe that there's any evidence to show that the criteria is met, or if we received conflicting evidence. And so we're going through the specific land use policies and evaluating each one of those. So I would like to stay somewhat focused on that. And just to bring it back, I think where we were having the discussion was specifically on the policy A1, Commissioner Leek had some concern that it's not promoting the compatibility between the development and the existing and desired neighborhood characters. So as we go through this, I'd like to try to stick to the specific criteria and try to avoid some of the more general comments.
As having been in your type of seat before, I will certainly appreciate that, and I will follow your guidance on that with one proviso. If you will tell me when the safety, there are three things that I've heard from the homeowners around that area that live there, and I'm putting myself in owning one of those properties, okay? So I don't, but I'm saying, I'm looking at it from their angle, okay? Tell me when safety/children, there was a big concern about where the children in a 50-some-odd unit place will play. Tell me when that comes up in here. I just want to make sure I don't miss that. The second one is the traffic pattern study. I'd like to know a little more. I want to make sure I'm focused laser beam on that area. And the third one is, and these are in no particular order, the parking, okay? I want to know how that parking and being, the developer has to meet code. I don't know where it's going to meet code. If there's 50 units down there or 55 and they get one per slot and 15 visitors, I don't know where the other two-car people are going to have. So you'll warn me with those three when they come up. I'll be happy to.
And maybe I may be able to recommend some on policy A1, safety. I think maybe item number F under policy A1, protect life and property from natural hazards. The other one was traffic. On policy A1C, minimize and mitigate adverse traffic impacts generated by new development on adjacent neighborhoods. And then parking, we'll have to see where that comes into play. I don't have any that come to mind, but I would say, you can keep that list, and as we go through these criteria, you can also look at how it applies.
And Mr. Chair, if I could just, if I may add to the comment, and Commissioner Phillips, being new, has not worked extensively with our community development code and the applicable development standards that would be applied to any eventual application that comes along. Again, we're looking at the use here and whether or not the use coupled with the development standards would meet the policies. I mean, it isn't just, we're not approving the development, okay? We're approving the use that if an application were filed and compliant with the underlying development standards and the conditioning authority that's in the development code, would those meet these policies? That's the question. The parking standard is, as you referenced, is a development standard that the applicant would need to comply with when an application is submitted. There's also provision for traffic reports that are required to be submitted when an application is filed. If a certain number of daily units or daily trips rather are generated by day, or there's an increase in the PM peak type thing. And as far as generalized, we talk about parking, traffic or concerns about children and that sort of thing. There is the conditioning authority which talks about the adverse impacts to the neighborhood as well. And there's an open space requirement on property of this type, 20%, I believe, where the children would presumably play. I mean, that's why we adopted 20% open space standard. Let's see, that's a standard there. So those standards are applicable to any development that comes along, whether that's multifamily or whether that's office or whatever. And so as you consider the policies, keep in mind that there's a whole code behind it, okay? And the applicant would have to meet the code too.
I understand that. I just am not convinced that the code is going to create parking spots that can't possibly exist down there.
Okay.
Chair, specific policies that relate to safety, traffic safety, and parking that are applicable to this request you can find on pages 16 and 17, and they're economic vitality policies B1H and B1J. Those are two policies you might look when you get to that.
Yeah, thank you, Director Siegel. So Commissioner Phillips, if we can wait till we get to those sections, maybe you can raise your concerns then, right?
I'm not trying to cause trouble, really.
No problem. Commissioner Stewart, you had your light on, but then you turned it off. Is this something?
Yeah, my question's out of context now, so
Okay,
I'll
thank
wait.
you. I'd like to check with Commissioners Fisher and Vice Chair Pape. Any comments again from?
Yeah, Commissioner Heap and Attorney Boone both expressed my concern, which is, what are we deciding? whether or not the traffic study was sufficient is irrelevant at this point. It's only relevant when there's a specific proposal. Our job as the Planning Commission, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, is to determine whether the city staff has done what the regulations and statutes require. Did they do, there are 7 policies here, and I don't have my glasses, but for example, the land use planning, community culture, inspiring places and spaces, complete neighborhoods and housing. There are 8 of them. Our job, I thought, as Planning Commission is, did they do that? And if they did, then our job is to say, okay, they met the criteria for changing the zoning. The specific proposal, whether it's a 54-unit housing development or a 20-story office building, will then be decided by the Developmental Review Commission, who approves and hears evidence about a specific project. So I guess I'm urging that when we take our vote, we're not looking at a particular objection, but as, did the city do what it was required to do to get a zone change? If anybody disagrees, I'd be more than happy to entertain that.
Commissioner Fisher, I would just say I agree, but I'd also maybe reword it a little bit to really, our job as the commission is to look at the findings that staff has provided, and then based on the testimony we received, state whether we agree or disagree with the findings that the criteria is met. So a little bit different words, but in essence, it's the same thing you're saying. Yeah. We're definitely not evaluating or determining a specific development application here. That's outside the scope.
Right.
Vice Chair Pape,
That's exactly the way I would have said it, so thank you.
Vice Chair Pape?
Yes, I do agree. Whatever the proposed, suggested, theoretical development might be, I do agree it is outside the scope of what we are charged with in this deliberation. That said, I do believe while the city, and we can still, I think there might be still some debate that needs to happen on this, may have met the criteria regarding traffic, I don't believe, I believe the city should still go further than what the criteria is for meeting the traffic study. Put another way, whatever the traffic study was based around was, in my opinion, the minimum requirement. And I think the city, based on what we've heard from the community, should go further and be a leader in this and do a higher study and maybe more in-depth study on potential impact regarding traffic.
So, Vice Chair Pepe, I think those are good comments. I think what you're suggesting is a condition then of approval for this criteria would be that more thorough traffic study be performed, a more detailed traffic study. I'll ask staff if that's a viable condition that the Plan Commission can make a recommendation on.
Well, I'm going to speak first. I'm sorry. I grimace at that suggestion. In 2 points. One is the applicant, as any applicant, either meets the standard or they don't meet the standard. Under quasi-judicial, if they meet the standard, then they are entitled to the approval. Okay? Now, to put a condition on a rezone is problematic, because the question happens, well, what if the condition is not met? It's still been changed, it's still been rezoned, so in fact I lived through this, and we have a current situation where a rezone was approved subject to a specific development proposal. And the problem is that that development proposal has not happened, okay? And so there it sits with a different zone than anybody wants to do because nobody wants to do that development proposal. It's a real problem. Conditions just, conditions don't work. What has to happen then is if in that case, they're going to have to come back in perhaps for an application to rezone it back the way it was. And then they have to meet the standards for that. You know, if they don't meet the standards for that, it sits there kind of in limbo. So I do not encourage conditions of approval because the property, is it rezoned or is it not? I mean, that's the problem. They either have met the standards or they haven't, I guess I would say. So.
As an example of an alternative in the rezoning of the property that the city formerly owned at the corner of Carmen Drive and Cruz Way, traffic was a constraint there. It could only absorb so many trips. So the rezoning of that property had a specific trip cap on it, so the future development would have to work within a budget for traffic. And I believe the approval of the code amendments for the Merrillhurst campus had the same type of requirement attached to them. That was part of the zoning language. That was part of the text amendment. It wasn't a condition, but I think maybe that was your point.
Yeah, that's a better way to implement that. If you find, okay, if you find that the criteria requires that cap to be placed, okay, and in those cases the commission did.
Okay.
Harry?
Vice Chair Pepe, do you have a further comment?
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt the others that were talking. I would not be in favor of putting a condition on this based on the traffic, but it is something that I think we should still discuss and debate in this meeting as to whether or not the city has met it and or should they be held to a higher standard based on, being the city.
All right, thank you. I'd like to take a comment or question from Commissioner Lee.
I just want to concur with what Commissioner Pape just said. Since we shouldn't approve this with a condition, what I hear you saying, Mr. Boone, is it's either thumbs up or thumbs down and no conditions.
Correct, but as Director Siegel indicated, the commission has found where it's necessary, you can impose a caps as part of the standards of the zone. Okay.
What caps can we?
Well, the example was in those two cases, I think, is that a certain amount of vehicle trips per day was. The traffic study came in and said, we've examined it based upon X number of vehicle trips per day. And so, well, the question is, well, what happens if it exceeds that? So the zone was approved saying you can have that use if your traffic study shows that your vehicle trips per day is that or less. Okay? So that's the standard of the zone then that was established. It's not a condition, see, that you either meet the standard and get the use, okay, or you don't meet the standard and you're not qualified for the use.
Can the standard be the number of units?
If you find from the record that that's necessary in order to meet the policies, yes.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Boone, but I think the procedure or the process that would need to play out in order for that to happen, because you already have a land use application before you with specific language, is that I think with like a development application that's before the DRC, if the DRC is looking at that, they're saying, we don't think we can approve this. It doesn't meet the criteria for, specific traffic or, some other code requirement. They'd look at the applicant and they'd say, well, you may choose, you may elect to modify your proposal. We'll continue the hearing, come back and present that. But it's the applicant's, in this case, the city's the applicant, but it's the applicant's choice as to whether they do that. Aside from that, it's, as you said, Commissioner Lee, a thumbs up or thumbs down. I don't think the commission could on the fly modify the application, right?
Well, if there's evidence to say that, in this case, a certain number of units is the max that could be required or could be found to meet the policies, if the evidence finds that, yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
well, there you go.
Because in the Merrillhurst application, which this commission heard, the evidence was limited to the evidence that was before it. That is, a maximum vehicle trips per day were submitted, okay? So the commission said, well, what happens if it exceeds that? Well, what you do is you put, your approval does not exceed the evidence that was before you. So you put a limitation on the use to match the evidence. So if you find the evidence is such that it requires a certain number of units, then I think you could oppose that.
But we don't have that evidence.
Well, that's for the commission to decide as you get through there. I don't know whether you do or you don't. I mean, that's up to you as we get there.
If we may continue. So if I can summarize, I think what we heard on policy A1 is that there's concerns with, is the criteria met for promoting compatibility between the development and existing desired neighborhood character? There's concerns with the traffic, which would be item number C, minimize or mitigate adverse traffic impacts generated by new development on adjacent neighborhoods. I can offer my feedback. What moved me on the traffic study was, what is the impact of the zone change that we're making? And then if you look at what's permissible under the current zoning, there was an example given of a business that had higher use. And so I think the traffic study came in and said that the multifamily use that's being proposed here would be less than that. And I was very comfortable with that. I felt that, as we're looking at making a zone change here, that the multifamily impact wouldn't be greater than what's already permissible under some of the business uses. So I was okay. But I'd like to, take a poll of the commission now on policy A1. Is there a position of the commission that the criteria is met, or do we feel that there was conflicting evidence and that we would want maybe to come back to this, that we'd look at adding code for like some type of traffic cap? And Attorney Boone.
I'm sorry. The actual standard is to maintain land use regulations sort of thing. So I think you have to keep in mind what the land use regulations are and whether or not this additional use would result, because right now it's fine. I mean, it's acknowledged, it's all compliant, everything. I mean, the existing uses maintain those land use regulations that do those things. 5007-003-5, okay, that is conditions on development. So we have a land use regulation which says the reviewing authority, when they're looking at an application, may impose conditions of approval on a major or minor development that, and in this case, subsection 3, if the condition is reasonably related to alleviation of a need for public services or facilities created or contributed to by the proposed development, which includes sewer, water, surface water, parks, open space, streets, sidewalks, and pathways. So we have maintained a land use regulation in existence for all other uses that are compliant where we look at streets. That's where that's where the DRC would impose conditions of approval in order to deal with the impacts on streets. There's also subsection 4 to conditions reasonably related to mitigating a negative impact on the built environment of the neighborhood in which it's created. Okay, so if there is a negative impact from traffic, that's where the DRC looks to say, well, we need to mitigate those impacts by X, Y, and Z when we're looking at the specific application. So I think the question to the commission is, does this land use request alter the existing balance, if you will, that the maintenance of land use regulations that already exist, type of thing. So are the tools there? Are we maintaining the land use regulations that allow us to address these things?
Okay. Thank you, Attorney Boone. Commissioners, I'll go around. Commissioner Simler. Oh, you're not participating, sorry. Commissioner Lee.
I say they do not.
Sorry.
I do not feel the applicant has met those, both because of neighborhood character The traffic study was not adequate. And on those two items, I say no, they have not met the standard.
Commissioner Phillips?
I'm still stuck on the, I just want to make sure I'm not saying that I'm voting that the safety/children issue, I'm not, I have no trouble with the study on the traffic, okay? That, you know, who am I to argue with the Department of Transportation, whoever did the study on the transportation? I'm not suggesting that they got it exactly right, but I believe that's okay for me, the study on that. The compatibility, I don't think I know enough to say anything on that, to be quite honest, okay, from reading everything that I read, okay? But the life and property from the natural hazards, if that's the safety issue with the children who's gonna live in that complex, I have trouble with that if that's what I'm voting on. I think that's where you said that would fit. So I'm having trouble with that one. Okay.
Commissioner Stewart?
I'm generally in favor of it. I think it's met. One comment I will make about this traffic study discussion. As I understand it, and I don't know a lot about traffic because I hire people to do that for me, but what I understand about traffic and traffic studies is that there's a trip generation manual that these consultants use. X number of trips for office, Y number of trips for housing, et cetera, et cetera. My assumption is they know how to use their manual, they use the numbers that are in the manual, and that's what the result was. I also know that when a development application is filed, there will be a more robust traffic study done because that's a requirement for the development application. The last thing I want to say is we've addressed one policy. We have 38 more to go. Is this the process that we're going to use, or should we just have a discussion?
I want to go through each criteria. Yeah, I think that's helpful for the council and for one. So we'll go through each one. I guess if it would go too late, we could continue. But let's go through all the criteria. Yes. Commissioner Pape, Vice Chair Pape, sorry.
I don't believe the applicant has met the criteria based on the traffic study that was done.
Thank you. Commissioner Fisher?
My sense is the planning staff addressed the following policies: land use planning, community culture, inspiring places and spaces, building lands and housing needs analysis, community connectivity and economic vitality, the Oregon statewide planning goals, the Metro Urban Growth Management Plan, and transportation planning. In each case, under each criterion, the city planning staff addressed the policy considerations by providing studies that included exhibits, findings, and written materials. The question of whether or not the city planning staff met their statutory burden is answered. Yes. The opposition, I mean, the people who are opposed to it raise issues that are hypothetical. I understand the concern, but I don't know if this is the place where those concerns should be addressed. All the arguments are directed towards deficiencies of a hypothetical of what could happen, and they're only theoretical. I think the city met its statutory requirement, or the staff met their statutory requirement of addressing all those policies and presented evidence. The other side presented arguments that had no basis in fact, no basis in evidence, no basis in anything but this is the worst case scenario that could happen. I think the city met its burden, and I would vote to accept their recommendations.
Right, so we're going through each criteria, but I take that to mean under policy A1, the criteria is met. And then my feedback was, with the added narrative that Attorney Boone gave about the underlying code and the fact that does our current land use regulations actually meet, and address any potential adverse traffic impacts. I think our underlying code does support that. And as Commissioner Stewart was mentioning, there are, systematic ways that the engineering staff and that the city staff go about applying that code to make sure it's met. So I'm comfortable with that. So I believe for this, we've got direction from the commission. Is there any formal count that staff would like to have on whether the criteria is met? Should we take a vote?
I think so, because ultimately, the question, ultimately, a majority of the commission has to vote on a motion, has to move it out. However, I think it would be helpful for the commission itself, but I think also on review by the city council to know where the stumbling blocks were.
Sure.
Okay, where the focus should be.
Right.
And it'd be helpful for the parties as well. So
Sure.
I think that would be.
So I think we have a lot of good discussion. Let's just go and give a formal vote on if the criteria is met, yes or no, on each commissioner. Commissioner Lee?
No.
Commissioner Phillips?
What was the question?
On policy A1, has the criteria been met, yes or no?
No.
Thank you. Commissioner Stewart?
Yes.
Commissioner Fisher?
Yes.
Vice Chair Pape?
No.
And I would vote yes. All right, so we'll move on. And again, if we feel like the findings have demonstrated that the criteria has been met, we don't have to have discussion. It's only on the ones that we have concern about. So we'll move on to policy A2. This is to ensure that land use regulations have sufficient flexibility to allow developers in the city to propose measures to adapt development to unique and difficult site conditions, preserve open space and natural resources, avoid negative impacts on the surrounding communities. Commissioners, comments on policy A2 on whether it meets the criteria? Would we like to vote? Commissioner Lee?
Yes.
Commissioner Phillips?
Yes.
Commissioner Stewart?
Yes.
Vice Chair Pepe?
Yes.
Commissioner Fisher?
Yes.
I'll vote yes. All right. Next is policy A3. This ensures high-quality building and site design through application of clear and objective design standards for residential development and design review. Utilize development review process for commercial, industrial, and institutional development to ensure high-quality building and site design and overall appearance. Commissioners, comments?
I think because it falls under the Westlake Grove design review standards that it meets that.
Thank you, Commissioner Lee. That is mentioned in the findings from the staff that there's clear and objective standards for future development. So I would agree. Any other comments? We vote. Commissioner Lee?
Yes, it meets that standard.
Commissioner Phillips?
Yes.
Commissioner Stewart?
Yes.
Commissioner Fisher?
Yes.
Vice Chair Pepe?
Yes.
Next is policy policy A5. We skipped I4. This allows mixed-use commercial and residential development within commercial zones. Commissioners, any comments or questions? Commissioner Lee?
I guess I just go back to the the neighborhood agreed to a certain plan, and now because the city, for some reason, feels obligated to put affordable housing somewhere and they own this land, that they're turning their backs on a sizable neighborhood who worked hard to make this Westlake Grove design quadrant very positive. And this kind of sullies the water in that whole process.
Commissioner Stewart?
Doesn't the WLG-OC zone already allow mixed use?
Doesn't allow residential.
But it allows mixed use, but not,
Yes.
okay.
Commissioner Fisher, go ahead.
I just want to ask, which I asked one of the people who testified, is it the position that once a city has approved of a plan, it can never change? I mean, that's my thinking. If conditions change and needs change, then those plans need to be looked at again. And after it's a 30-year-old plan, the city is not what it was 30 years ago.
Commissioner Lee?
I would say that the Westlake Grove plan is not 30 years old. It's only 3 years old, maybe 4. Maybe the whole comprehensive plan for Lake Oswego is that old, but not the Westlake Grove corridor plan. And the neighbors and the neighborhoods were in on the design and the implementation of the criteria for this mixed-use commercial and limited residential. So we've had a housing affordability crisis for the last 15 or 20 years. So this is nothing new for the city. It's just an idea that seems to have surfaced with a possible opportunity.
You, Vice Chair Pepe, any comments?
Change is inevitable. That being said, I think in this situation, the city has a unique opportunity to really work closely, much closer with the neighborhood associations and the neighbors specifically adjacent or in very, very close proximity to this development to find a compromise that at least 25, at most maybe 50% could get on board with and approve. Maybe, not be overly thrilled and excited about, but at least they could approve it knowing that the city was really doing everything they could in order to meet, as I just said, at least 25% or 50% of the neighborhoods, of those neighbors that live in that neighborhood. And I don't know that that's been done yet.
Thank you. Commissioner Lee?
I think the overriding concern with the neighbors was not that they didn't want affordable housing there. They're all for that. What they were concerned about was the density. And the density aspirationally and probably economically is a 50-unit minimum.
Attorney Boone?
Well, I would just note for the commission that the policy is to allow mixed-use commercial and residential development, that's mixed use, within commercial zones. The WLG zones are pursuant to Table 500104-1, zoning designations in our zoning ordinance. The WLG zones are in a mixed-use zone. They are not in a commercial zone. So when I look back and suggest to the commission, when we look back at the policy, does this allow mixed-use commercial and residential development within commercial zones? Well, the WLG isn't in a commercial zone, so it's really not, I would say, not an applicable policy. I mean, great discussion, but does this allow mixed-use commercial residential development within a commercial zone? Well, you have to start with a commercial zone. If this is not a commercial zone, does this application allow mixed-use commercial residential development within a commercial zone? Well, no, it doesn't, but it doesn't, that's okay, because this is not going to commercial zones. the goal, if you were dealing with a commercial zone, is to allow mixed-use residential development in a commercial zone. But that's why I think, I would just point that, I guess that's all I need to say.
Thank you, Mr. Greenwood. One question of the staff is that in the findings, it says that policy A5 is addressed on pages 17 of the application narrative. Is it all the paragraphs on page 17, or are there specific ones that staff's findings are related to?
Looking at up now, page 17.
Where it says your response.
Right. So in the application narrative, let's see, policy A5.
Yeah, this is on page 8, policy A5, and then it says the findings of the applicant is that policy A5 is addressed on pages 17 of the application narrative, and that, based on that, the policy is met.
Yeah,
I'm just wondering if we can,
Yeah, so
is it
in
the
the
entire page of 17, or?
no, the application narrative at the top of page 17 is the response to A5. It starts, the site is currently zoned a combination of WLG-RMU, and it goes on from there. It's just that paragraph.
Oh, excuse me, Commissioner Leek, would you like to state your comments for the record?
Yeah, I guess the proposed amendments will unify the acreage sites. Well, WLG-OC does not currently allow multifamily development. The proposed code amendment changes will allow residential development within this specific area that will be zoned. So right now, the area does not allow multifamily development. Is that accurate?
Okay, so,
The residential, the WLG-RMU zone allows residential uses.
But does not currently allow multifamily development.
Well, it allows residential uses up to a specified density in the code, and we can look
Right.
at that if you'd like.
But not multifamily development.
It says in the code on table 50.03.02-2, WLG, residential use at R5 density or greater, which is not typically multifamily, but R5 density or greater is permitted, and then footnote 1 says, get down there. Oh, a net site density of 2,500 square feet lot area per unit allowed in conjunction with office uses in the same building. So WLG-RMU allows, conceivably could allow multifamily if it's in conjunction with an office use. That is why it's called residential mixed use.
But not if
But
it's,
not freestanding multifamily.
right, which is what this project is slated to be.
That's what the rezoning application is
Yes.
requesting for the
Right.
WLG-RC.
So you're requesting it to be rezoned to exclusively multifamily residential with no commercial.
No, the applicant is requesting that the WLG-OC zone include multifamily as a permitted use. Other permitted uses of the zone are office, daycare, retail, restaurants, a whole litany of uses are allowed. So future redevelopment of the site could be freestanding office, it could be multifamily, it could be daycare with multifamily, it could be any of those uses that are permitted by the zone, provided it meets the development review standards.
But if aspirational numbers are 50 units, that would negate the ability to have daycares or,
Not necessarily.
No?
No, actually, the agencies that produce affordable or workforce housing, income-targeted housing, they will look at providing supportive services with that housing for some of the units. That might be daycare, it could be other supportive services. That's beyond the scope of what you're looking at.
yeah, I mean, that would be a permitted use in the zone.
Be permitted by the zone. Yeah.
Right. So it's up to the applicant, it's up to the developer, the owner, to decide what uses permitted within the zone would be permissible, residential and commercial. Well, WLG-RMU. My point is, that the whole WLG is in mixed-use zones, not commercial zones. So I'm not sure that this policy is directly applicable. I understand the intent and the discussion, but.
All right, thank you. Commission, shall we vote? Commissioner Lee? Is the criteria met?
Doesn't want to hear me.
You're on.
Can I abstain?
Let me defer to
Because
staff. I thought we were asking for
Up or
a yes
down?
or no.
Well,
Yeah.
Ultimately, you'll have to vote yes or no on the whole application. This is to give guidance to the city council and to yourself in trying to ferret that out.
I guess I go back to what Commissioner Fisher said, that this checks all the boxes, but the answers are real wishy-washy or vague, and I say no.
Commissioner Phillips?
I certainly appreciate both sides of the argument, but I do believe that the argument of communities need to move forward, this apparently needs to, this is not such an egregious project in my mind that it's going to affect the overall, it's not going to systemically change that neighborhood forever, okay? So I'm going to vote for it.
Thank you. Commissioner Stewart?
I think within the lens of the comprehensive plan, I think this meets the criteria. So yes.
Vice Chair Pepe?
No.
Commissioner Fisher?
Yes.
And I would vote yes. I would also argue that the applicability of this particular policy seems to be a bit weak, given that it's the Westlake Grove Village design and the Village Center. So I believe that, on the limited basis that this does apply, it's been met. We'll move on to policy A6. Require that residential densities and allowed land uses within Lake Oswego urban service boundaries not exceed the capacity of planned public facilities and services. Again, the staff's finding is that it has been, the policy has been met, and that the policy is addressed on pages 17 of the narrative we were just looking at. Any concerns with the criteria being met, commissioners?
Which one are we on, this one?
We're on policy A6, yeah, on page 8, policy A6.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Commissioner Fisher, Commissioner Vice Chair Pape, any concerns on the criteria? Hear none, we'll vote. Commissioner Lee, criteria met.
Criteria met.
Commissioner Phillips,
I'm fine with it.
Stewart,
Yes.
Commissioner Fisher,
Yes.
Vice Chair Pepe,
Yes.
right? We'll now move on to policy B2. This is use the city code to require new development to be adequately served by public facilities and services, including water, sanitary sewer, transportation facilities, parks and open space, and surface water management, and storm drainage facilities. Services shall be available or committed prior to the approval of development. The finding was that the application narrative does not address policy B2, but staff finds the proposal meets this policy. It's, as noted previously under land use planning, policies A1, A6. So, commissioners, any comments on policy B2? See none. I think if this is where it falls in, I think it should be a sanitary sewer, transportation facilities. And so transportation facilities is explicitly being called out in policy B2. That's a question to staff, is that correct?
Yes, there should be a comma there in the copying of this in the staff report.
And I think in the testimony, we heard a lot of testimony about the concern for transportation, and some of the rebuttal and additional testimony that we received. There was, evidence submitted based on TriMet's plan, a lot of concern about the bus service. Commissioners, any comments then on policy B2? None. Vote? No. Commissioner Lee?
I have a comment, just that the applicant's response with the TriMet's Southwest Transportation, whatever, study from 2015 and 16 is very aspirational about additional services being provided for Boones Ferry and Lake Oswego. And I don't think it should get in the way of approving this project, should we go forward with it, yay or nay, but I find it a weak rebuttal. And transportation is there, but I think it's not adequate.
So is the criteria met or not met?
Yes, criteria is met.
Commissioner Phillips?
Yes.
Commissioner Stewart?
I think it's met, and I just want to make, I guess, one comment about transportation and bus service and just high-speed transit in general is typically there has to be a need first before the transit comes, because I think we would have a hard time getting voters to approve expansion of TriMet if there's no need. So unfortunately, I understand that ideally you have good transit for housing, but unfortunately, the way things work, you gotta get the housing first before you get the transit. So yes.
Commissioner Fisher?
It's the old, if you build it, they will come. No, I'll vote yes.
Vice Chair Pepe?
With apprehension, I vote yes.
I would vote yes. I did have a little bit of concern with the parks and open space being sufficient. I think, we heard a lot of testimony from the neighborhood about was there, safe places for the children to play. I thought that was maybe a little bit outside of the scope of this, but, and also the question was raised during that about, what does the existing land use, provide for the homes that are there? How do those children's play? So I was okay with the parks and open space, and I would vote yes for the criteria being met. Policy B10, maintain land use regulations and development standards that require new residential subdivisions, developments of 4 or more units to address all of the following design criteria. Open space, natural resources, item number A, a provision of a street system which provides efficient connection, development of transit opportunities appropriate to the scale and character of the development of a safe, convenient pedestrian bicycle circulation system, management of surface water and storm drainage consistent with the city's surface water management plan, assurance of privacy and quiet for future residents and abutting properties, balance energy conservation measures such as energy efficient design and solar access with preservation of trees and planting of new trees, buffering and screening from adjacent uses and streets, building placement and location relationships, provision of adequate emergency vehicle access, minimize and or mitigate adverse traffic impacts generated by new development on adjacent neighborhoods. Commissioners' comments on policy B10? Commissioner Lee?
I think that standard has not been met at a high enough level for me to feel comfortable approving and saying yes to that.
Any specific sections on A through K that you feel?
Obviously, the traffic and the study that I think was very weak at best, and impacts on the neighborhood as far as noise and privacy. I've seen this happen, and the developer's supposed to put in a fence for privacy, and in the final analysis, they put in a split rail fence that's 3 feet high. It's a lot of density up against a neighborhood that's not.
Thank you. Commissioners, any comments? Commissioner Stewart?
I guess my general opinion on this is unless I have a development application to review, I don't know how I can even comment on these items other than knowing that the burden of proof will rest on the applicant for a development application to prove that these things are met. So
Right.
I mean, I'm going to say yes because I'm assuming that these criteria will have to be demonstrated at the time of a development application.
In the staff report, it explains that these policy objectives are implemented through the Community Development Code, and that a future land use application would have to comply with those standards. So I think that was the staff conclusion, was that the criteria are met because it's not altering these existing requirements in a way that would be contrary to the policy.
Oh, maybe a question for staff. Under item number I, building placement and locational relationships, there was discussion of the 5 feet increased height, and that buffering would be required with an 80-foot setback.
Right.
So would that be covered under item number I, building placement and locational relationships?
Yeah, I think you could look at that and say, is the application maintaining land use regulations that provide for, under I? You know,
Okay, thank you.
does that change still meet the criteria?
Commissioner Fisher or Vice Chair Pape, any comments, or we'll vote on if the criteria is met?
Right? Maybe I'm totally off here. As a planning commission, all the things that are being raised about an inadequate traffic study, the height of the buildings, all these other things, why are we, as the planning commission, concerned with that at this point? Maybe I'm totally off. My understanding is that what we're voting on is, did the city meet its statutory requirements for a zoning change? If I'm wrong, I would love somebody to clarify it for me, because I was under the impression that that's what we were voting on.
Correct, Commissioner Fisher. Any commissioners wish to disagree or comment to Commissioner Fisher? Commissioner Lee?
Me again. I think what they're asking us to do is vote or allow this to happen so it can move forward. But we have to evaluate what they have given us. What I think I hear you saying is, you read through everything, and you think that whatever they said met the criteria, and so you're good with it. I think I'm a little more circumspect about reading it and being more inquisitive about what they have provided us, as opposed to just taking it as face value, boilerplate, and okaying it.
Commissioner Fisher?
No, I absolutely agree with you, and I'm not saying that all we're doing is rubber stamping it. I'm saying the people who raise the issues that you're raising, I haven't seen anything substantive, either with studies. Did they do their own traffic studies? Did they cite any source that would say that there's going to be danger to their children? My sense is, even if the city's findings are inadequate, in your opinion, or anybody's opinion, it doesn't matter. They did what they were required to do. They provided evidence. They showed studies. They did all the things that I thought that they were required to do. If that's not what they were required to do, then please enlighten me, because I thought that's what we were doing.
Thank you, Commissioner Fisher. I think I agree with you, but I'd like to keep moving. We do have a number of criteria to get through, and so I think we've kind of raised concern with the scope, and I appreciate those comments, but let's keep moving through the criteria. So, Commissioner Fisher, again, on this policy B10.
I think they met their burden.
Vice Chair Pepe?
Respectfully, Chair Heap, I understand why we want to continue to move forward in addressing what I would like to address what Commissioner Fisher just brought up. If it is the charge of the Planning Commission to follow the procedure in the way that Commissioner Fisher put forth, that takes out the subjective criteria that I think each of us brings to the table. When hearing the both sides put forth their case, you need to evaluate what each has either provided through written testimony and surveys, and or through living in that neighborhood, for instance. From that point and from that stance, I don't believe that the city did everything that they should do as far as traffic and opportunity for a development there, inciting where the building should go and how big the building should be. So from that standpoint, I would vote no.
Then I think everybody's voted but me. I would say, yeah, I would vote for the criteria as met. I did think about the building placement with regards to the increased 5 foot in height with an 80-foot setback from that as being a requirement. I thought that was sufficient. I know there was a lot of concern that was brought by the neighborhood about that additional 5 feet, but in thinking about it, and I think there was a lot of testimony that there was misunderstanding on that also, that it was really not to provide the individual units with an increased ceiling height, but it was to try to adhere to the current code that's in the Westlake Grove Center, that the pitch heights on the roof, and that was the reason for the 5 foot. And I thought setting it back 80 foot wouldn't really make a big difference. So I was okay with that. I thought the impact was met. And then the other area was the transit opportunities, as we were talking about earlier. I think there is a good transportation in that area. And then I think, when we look at some of the future bus transportation, I felt like, there was, the criteria was adequately met for that. So I would vote for meeting the criteria. Next is policy B11. Evaluate proposed land use actions to determine the full range of potential negative impacts as required by the Community Development Code and require applicants to provide appropriate solutions.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, did Commissioner Phillips, what was your vote on that last criterion? I just don't recall it, and I'm taking notes here.
Did we not vote through? Should I go back and repost?
No, well, it was up to you, Mr. Chair. I have the comments of everybody but Mr. Phillips. Maybe I missed it.
Sorry.
I didn't vote.
Sorry, Commissioner Phillips, would you like to vote?
Okay, as far as B10, it looks like the applicants met, they're maintaining the land regulations and development. I have no doubt that's true. However, for an example, number K, I don't think they can do that. I don't think the existing standards will be able to minimize or mitigate adverse traffic impacts generated. So I'll vote yes, but I think that's the heart of the discussion or the disagreement we're having about what's our job here tonight. Our job, in my opinion, and I think others have voiced this, is we indicate, and my experience is stop something as soon as you see a problem and get it rectified before you move on and vote it into the next body and let them solve it, okay? I don't believe this, I don't think the regulations and stuff will be able to mitigate or minimize traffic impacts in that area. I've driven down in that neighborhood, not that particular road, I've just driven in that area. You can't even take 2 cars on the road. Somebody has to stop, okay? So anyway, I vote for it, yes.
Well, if you think, I'm sorry, if you think a sub-criterion is not met, then you would.
No, I do believe it's met.
Okay, you do believe
I
it's met.
believe it says maintain the
Right.
land use regulations. I believe that is true.
And we
What
have
I'm
it-
saying is when they try to implement it in the next phase, whoever builds it, they won't be able to do anything
Okay,
about it,
all right.
okay?
Thank you.
I think we've received votes from all commissioners, so we'll move on.
Yes, so I have a 4-2 on notes on that one.
Okay. Policy B11, then evaluate the proposed land use actions to determine the full range of potential negative impacts as required by the Community Development Code and require applicants to provide appropriate solutions. Commissioners, comments on this? Again, I think the main impact that's being called out here is the height increase of 5 foot at the visual impacts to the adjacent single-family residential properties in the low-density R7.5 residential zone. But the impact, again, is addressed by requiring a setback for the additional height of 80 feet from all 7.5 zone properties. Commissioners, any other negative impacts? Right. So we'll vote. Commissioner Lee, criteria met.
Criteria met.
Commissioner Phillips,
Yes, I'm fine.
Commissioner Stewart,
Yes.
Vice Chair Pepe,
Yes.
Commissioner Fisher,
Yes.
and I'll vote yes. All right, we'll move on to policy C1, enact and maintain regulations and standards which require new development to enhance the existing built environment in terms of size, scale, bulk, color, materials, and architectural design, landscaping, buffering and screening between different land uses, measures to foster a safe and interesting transit and pedestrian environment, minimize and or mitigate adverse traffic impacts generated by new development on adjacent neighborhoods. Comments, commissioners? Commissioner Lee?
I think some of these, again, until you see what's proposed, how can you apply these standards to something that doesn't exist? What I will say is minimize or mitigate adverse traffic impacts generated by new development on adjacent neighborhoods. I feel that has not been addressed. So I would say no.
Any other comments, commissioners? We'll take a vote. None? Commissioner Lee, has the criteria been met?
No.
Commissioner Phillips? Yes. Commissioner Stewart?
Yes.
Vice Chair Pepe?
No, based on traffic.
Commissioner Fisher?
Yes.
And I'll vote yes. Policy C3, ensure through development and design standards that both public and private developments enhance the aesthetic quality and of the community. Again, I think the findings here is calling the Community Development Code has existing building design standards. The Westlake Grove Design District, and that complies with the policy. Comments? All right. Commissioners, I'll just ask, it seems like everybody's kind of indicating their agreement. Is there anybody that votes that the criteria is not met? No? And everyone's in favor of voting for criteria is met? Okay, unanimous, met? Adopt, policy C5, adopt and maintain clear and objective standards for needing housing pursuant to the state law. Commissioners, any comments? Does the commission agree that the criteria is met? Is there anybody that wishes to vote the criteria is not met? No? Commission unanimously votes the criteria is met. Policy D1, coordinate the development and amendment of the city plans and actions related to land use with other effective agencies, including county, state, metro, federal agency, and special districts. This talks about the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding between the City of Lake Oswego, Clackamas County Metro, agreeing to explore affordable housing. I think this one was clear. Commissioners, do we all agree that the criteria is met? Is there anybody that wishes to vote the criteria is not met? None? Unanimous? Oh, excuse me, Commissioner Lee, did you wish?
No, I'm trying to turn it off.
Oh, all right. So unanimous that commissioners feel the criteria is met. Policy D2, maintain a development review commission to review quasi-judicial land use matters, maintain a planning commission to review quasi-judicial and legislative land use matters, and when necessary, make recommendations to city council. This is the finding is that the policy D2 is addressed on page 18 of the application narrative. Any commissioners wish to disagree that the criteria is met? We all agree the criteria is met, unanimous, right? Policy E1, A through G, ensure that the amendments to the comprehensive plan map and zoning maps are specific to specific locational criteria and other standards, including the location in relation to arterial and collector streets, capacity of public facilities and services, consistent with adjacent land use patterns or ability to buffer, screen, and blend to similar land uses, conformance with comprehensive plan goals and policies, applicable and adopted neighborhood plans and applicable land use regulations. Item number E, effect and overall land supply and metro housing rule. Item F, demonstration of public need. Item G, other criteria determined necessary. Again, staff's recommendation is the findings, with the findings is that the criteria has been met. Anyone wish to call out any specific items they disagree on the criteria being met? We all, Commissioner Lee.
I guess the only one, again, I have issue with is location in relation to arterial or collector streets. And again, the traffic impact and the study that was very perfunctorily done by the city and checked the boxes makes me very uncomfortable. And the reason why the neighborhood doesn't have a traffic impact study done is they don't have the resources that the city does to do them. Therefore, there was no rebuttal that was substantiated in fact, because they're just a neighborhood association of people. They're not a city government with a lot of money to spend on traffic impact studies.
Thank you, Commissioner Lee. Any other comments? Commissioner Leek, are you in favor of the criteria being met or not met?
No.
Commissioner Phillips?
Well, I was going to vote yes until I heard her argument there, and now I don't know the answer. But I got to vote somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to vote for it because it ensures amendment of the plan zoning maps are subject to locational criteria and other standards. I'm going to vote yes, but again, I don't believe they can actually do it when they actually, does that make sense?
I understand your comments, yes.
Huh?
I understand your comments, so.
Okay.
Commissioner Stewart?
Yes.
Commissioner Fisher?
Yes.
Vice Chair Pepe?
Can I also, Commissioner Leek, I really enjoy your passion. I understand that they're a local community and they don't have the resources that the city, that bothered me and I almost voted with you. My question is, the city provided a study. Are we to say, well, the communities don't have to provide studies, they can just do it based on feelings? They feel like it's a terrible traffic problem? Or is there some criteria that we do have to hold ourselves to? So in my mind, the city did a study. Maybe they were wrong. And as I said, the community will have an opportunity when the actual proposal comes to rebut what the city said. But as of this moment, the only one who submitted facts and studies is the city, the applicant. I understand what you're saying, and that troubles me a lot, right? That they're only a community organization. But shouldn't we rely and make our decisions based on factual things as opposed to, oh, this is terrible, I'm worried about what's going to happen? It seems to me that's not a basis for making a decision. I'm sorry.
So Commissioner Fisher, your vote, is the criteria met?
Yes.
Vice Chair Pepe?
I don't believe that it's met. And with respect to what Commissioner Fisher just brought forward, as well as Commissioner Leek, I don't agree with Commissioner Leek in that just because they're a neighborhood or a neighborhood association, they don't have the ability or resources to do a traffic study. I believe in recent history, we have experienced neighborhood associations hiring experts to do various studies. That said, I don't agree that the study that the applicant put forward is adequate enough to justify this proposal. So my vote is no.
My vote would be yes. Again, with respect to the traffic, I felt like the study that mentioned actually the higher use of the daycare and the amount of trips that would be generated by that was quite compelling, and that the application for the multifamily would be less. So I feel like the criteria has been met. I'd vote yes. Move on to policy E2, maintain residential neighborhoods at existing zone and plan density designations, except where changes to higher residential density designations, subsections A through B. The staff finds that the site is not in a residential neighborhood, and the proposed amendments therefore do not change existing zone and plan density designations of existing residential neighborhoods. Accordingly, this policy does not apply. Although the site is not designated residential on the comprehensive plan or zoned residential, not in a residential neighborhood, if the commission finds this policy applies, staff finds that it is met for the reasons addressed on pages 12 to 21 of the narrative. So I guess this question is a little bit different, not as just if the criteria is met or not met, but do we feel that it applies? Comments?
I'd like someone to explain this a little better to me. I don't understand what it's saying. Can you?
The findings that staff is proposing that it may not apply, we could defer to staff for further clarification.
I'm sorry. I think the first question is where is the residential neighborhood? All right, is the site in a residential neighborhood? If it is not in a residential neighborhood, then whatever would be applied for would not change the residential neighborhood's existing zone and plan density designations. Okay. If the site is in a residential neighborhood, then does the addition of allowing residential use change the existing zone and plan density designations?
Okay, I get it, thank you.
Okay.
So again, I think the assertion is that the site is not in a residential neighborhood according to the zoning and policies that we currently have.
And I guess just for completeness, even if you find it's in a residential neighborhood, does it maintain existing zone and plan density designations? You should do that. That's the policy, except changes to higher residential density designations are permissible. Okay, so,
Guess it meets the criteria.
Commissioners, anybody that feels it does not meet criteria? No? And unanimous, the commission finds it meets the criteria on policy E2. Next are community culture, civic engagement, policies 1, 2, 4, 5, and 9. Policy 1, I'll just kind of go through these. Policy 1 is provide citizen involvement opportunities appropriate to the scale of the given planning effort. Policy 2, ensure the information related to land use planning and decision-making is readily accessible to the public and easy to understand. Policy 4, provide opportunities for citizens to engage in land use planning and decision-making. Policy 5, seek citizen input through service organizations, interest groups, and individuals, as well as through the neighborhood organizations. Commissioners, comments on policies 1, 2, 4, and 5?
I would challenge the easy to understand part.
Is there a fair comment, Commissioner Phillips? Commissioners, any more feedback? A vote? Commissioner Stewart? Excuse me, Commissioner Lee?
Yes, meets the standard.
Commissioner Phillips?
Yes.
Commissioner Stewart?
Yes.
Vice Chair Pepe?
Yes.
Commissioner Fisher?
Yes.
I vote yes. All right. So now we'll move on to page 12. This is inspiring places and spaces. Goal 1, policies 1.b, 2, 3, and 7. Goal 2, policies 3 and 4. Goal 1 is to adopt implementation measures and guidelines that ensure new development in mixed-use commercial and employment areas, promotes a safe and attractive pedestrian environment, reflects high-quality aesthetics considering size, scale, and bulk, color, materials, includes buffering and screening to protect residential uses in neighborhoods. Commissioners?
I guess the only thing I can comment on is pedestrian use along West Sunset is inadequate. Boones Ferry, it's just fine. And that's where I have concerns.
Yeah, I would say we did receive a lot of testimony that there was concern on the safe and attractive pedestrian environment. Some of it was more specific to, children playing. But I think in general, there was a lot of community feedback in the safe, pedestrian environment. So there was concern there, but in relation to, how does the zone, rezone change that, and what are, how are they dealing with it with the existing, homes they have? I thought that, this criteria was met. Commissioners, any comments or any votes that the criteria is not met, or unanimous that it's met from the commission? So unanimous, the commission finds the criteria is met. Policy 2, adopt and maintain design standards and provide incentives that encourage exceptional or high quality design.
I think it's been met.
Commissioners, any dissenting that the criteria has not been met? Vice Chair Pepe?
I guess I'm curious how we can vote yes or no on this when we don't know what the design is going to look like.
Yeah, I think it's the design standards that are in place. Is that adequate to make sure that the design standards encourage high quality design? And I think the findings is calling out that the West Lake Grove OC zone office and commercial to ensure the design development will be of exceptional or high quality. So it's really relying on those standards that are in place with the WLG-OC, the Westlake Grove Design District. Yeah.
Based on the guidance, with the guidance and the guardrails set forth with the current design standards in place, then yeah, I would say it was met.
The commission's finding is that unanimous that the criteria is met. No dissenters, okay. Establish standards for new development to preserve and enhance the natural environment and to integrate natural features and functions. So I think the findings here is that our existing community development code has existing standards to meet this policy. And there's nothing that's included to change or protection of any natural features with this. Anybody wish to disagree? And Iris, did we lose Vice Chair Pepe?
Bathroom break?
Attorney Boone, how should we proceed if Vice Chair Pepe is disconnected?
Well,
Oh, he's back. Okay.
No, I'm,
stalled.
I'm,
You just
I'm
turned the
here. I've
camera
got
off.
really bad connections. Yeah, I just turned the camera off. I'm still here.
Okay,
Just really, really bad connection for whatever reason happening right now.
no problem. We'll proceed. I just want to make sure we didn't lose you. Commissioners, any disagreement on the criteria being met for policy 3? Okay. Unanimous? I think, did I misspoke there? We were on policy 2? Yeah, okay, so I mentioned policy 3, but let's go say policy 2. Unanimous consent that the criteria has been met by the commission. Anybody wishes to disagree? No? Okay, so policy 2, we unanimously find the criteria has been met. Policy 3, establish standards for new development to preserve and enhance the natural environment and to integrate natural features and functions. Again, no changes to this. Commission unanimously finds the criteria has been met. Anyone wish to disagree? None, we agree. Policy 7, enhance the unique character of Lake Oswego's neighborhoods and commercial districts as the city grows and changes by adopting plans, codes, guidelines, and other implementation measures. Again, the findings are that the proposed amendments are proposed to help address an identified need for new affordable multifamily housing in the city. The West Lake Grove Design District and Lake Grove Village Center will be enhanced by adopting codes and zoning map changes that make it possible to meet the housing need in close proximity to commercial services, schools, parks, and bus transit service. Commissioners, anyone wish to state that the criteria has not been met? No? All right. Finding is unanimous that policy 7, the criteria has been met. We got a ways to go. Does the commission wish to take a break, or should we continue going?
I need to take a break real quick.
There's been a request to take a break, so if we could recess for 5 minutes, we'll come back in 5 minutes, we adjourn. Commission's recessed. We're back on there, so I'd like to call the meeting back to order. I believe we're on, we'd finished page 12. So we'll start on page 13 with goal 2. Policy 3, maintain a compact urban form by focusing higher density development in town centers and employment centers to avoid or minimize the expansion of the urban growth boundary. Again here, the findings are discussing that the comprehensive plan identifies subject site as within the West Lake Grove Village, neighborhood village, and adding multifamily residential as an allowed use to the neighborhood villages is an appropriate way to add more housing to the city without the need to expand the urban growth boundary. Commissioners, any dissent, or do we wish to vote that the commission finds the criteria has been met?
I think the criteria has been met.
Yes, so unanimous, no dissent. Policy 4, promote the careful organized patterns of growth through land use regulations, standards, and incentives. Reduce impacts on natural resources, item number A. Allow a mix of use neighborhood villages, item number B. Minimize impacts on existing low-density residential neighborhoods by implementing the residential density policies of the complete neighborhoods and housing chapter. Provide design guidelines that enhance and preserve the unique character of Lake Oswego's neighborhoods. Provide opportunities for local economic growth. Again, the staff's recommendation is that the criteria has been met. The proposed amendments to allow multifamily housing will not disrupt the patterns of growth. Commissioners, any concerns? Wish to call out? Criteria is met. Right, unanimous on that. Complete neighborhoods and housing policies A1.D, A3, A4, B1, housing choice and affordability, C1. Policy A1, when reviewing requests for residential zone changes, in addition to applying the criteria outlined in land use planning policies, the following locational criteria apply. High density residential zoning includes R3, R2, R0, RW zones. High density residential zoning is intended to provide attached single-family and multifamily dwellings, duplexes, and detached single-family homes on small lots. High-density residential may be applied to areas that are currently developed at high residential densities in areas within the boundaries of a town center, employment center, or neighborhood business commercial district. Again, staff's findings is that the criteria has been met. The Westlake Grove OC zone allows both residential and commercial uses. The WLG-RMU zone on a small portion of lot 0.10 is also proposed to be changed to WLG-OC. In summary, these are minor map cleanup amendments that result in a more logical zoning boundary. I would agree with that. Commissioners, any concerns? I'm on page 14, policy A1 on the findings.
Yeah. Yes, I agree with that.
Any comments, commissioners? None? I'll jump down to the, on item number D, allowed mixed use development within the boundaries of a designated town centers, employment center, neighborhood business, commercial districts. Again, the findings, subject site is designated Westlake Grove Design District and is within a designated neighborhood village on the comprehensive plan, making it an appropriate site for mixed use development, which would be facilitated by allowing multifamily residential as permitted use on the entirety of the 1.3 acre site. The sub-policy is met.
Agreed.
Policy A3, development and maintain land use regulations and standards that promote orderly transitions, compatibility between different residential densities and other land uses, such as measures that address traffic and circulation, building and site design, buffering, screening, tree preservation, other landscape treatments. Staff's finding is policy A3 partially addressed on page 25 and 26 of the narrative. The city code has standards that address the traffic and circulation. We had a pretty long discussion about that. This is Lake Oswego Code 50.0703.1 triple I, and 50.0703.5A triple I, 50.0603, and then the other standards for building and site design. Commissioners, any disagreement?
I still am very uncomfortable with the addressing of traffic and circulation on West Sunset and the building buffering between the neighborhoods. So I would say no, that has not been met in my book.
Thank you. Commissioners? Commissioner Phillips? Criteria met?
Yeah, I'm fine with it.
Mr. Stewart?
Before I vote, I had a question. As a condition of approval for any sort of development application on this site, is there a requirement for a cross-access easement to the existing commercial that's next to it?
Yeah, the Westlake Grove Design District regulations have site-specific circulation plans for several blocks, and this is one of them. So that circulation plan shows, and it requires that any development of this site show a plan for connecting eventually to the parcels, I think, to the west, should those properties redevelop. And it also diagrams connections to both Boones Ferry Road and West Sunset. So if you
So there would be a cross-access between this property, assuming it's an entire property, and is it Renaissance Homes, whatever is next door, as a maybe a third way of exiting the property?
Yeah, and those are conceptual plans, so that the actual design or alignment of those would be coordinated.
So there may be, it's fair to say there may be a means to alleviate some of the traffic in the neighborhood by having something like that in place. Anyway, my vote's yes.
Vice Chair Pepe?
No.
Commissioner Fisher?
Yes.
I'll vote yes.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Fisher. So I believe that was 2 no's for the criteria not being met, and the rest were 5 yeses for criteria met.
4.
4.
Commissioner
Oh, yes,
Sanders.
Commissioner Summer's. I keep on forgetting, sorry. Right, policy A4, maintain land use regulation standards that provide mitigation of adverse impacts such as noise, traffic, privacy, and visual aesthetics on differing adjacent land uses through site and building design. Again, the findings is that this is partially addressed on page 26 of the narrative. It talks about the allowing conditions to be imposed on a development in order to eliminate or mitigate negative impact on the built environment caused by the development. These code amendments that we're reviewing tonight do not alter the existing standards. So again, kind of going back to the original discussion on, the actual development goes to the development review process, and whatever's covered there by the development review commission or staff. Yeah.
I guess you have to say, yes, that meets the standard, that it kicks the can down the road.
Anybody wish to vote the criteria is not met? None. We unanimously find that A4 is met, criteria is met. B1, provide and maintain zoning and development regulations that allow the opportunity to develop adequate supply and variety of housing types that accommodate the needs of future and existing Lake Oswego residents. Again, seeing policy B1 is partially addressed. Talks about the housing needs analysis that was done that identified 2,321 new high-density units would be needed by 2035 to meet the projected population forecast. Anybody wish to vote that the criteria is not met? Right. So we agree the criteria is met on B1. Going on to page 15 then, we'll jump down to the bottom. The policy C1 provides zoning and development regulations that support implementation of the town centers, employment centers, and neighborhood villages as functional and attractive amenities for nearby residential neighborhoods. Again, findings are that this is met, its subject site is within the Westlake Grove Neighborhood Village, identified in the existing plan, and the existing Westlake Grove zoning implements the designations. The proposed code amendment is allowing multifamily housing, ensures a functional village center with a population base that can help support the commercial services and amenities that exist in our plan for Westlake Grove. Everyone for? Any against?
I'm against it. I don't think that it supports what is in place and that the neighborhood associations approved and voted for when they did the Westlake Grove design plan. I think this is an abrupt turnaround from what they expected this to be. And I know that things change. I just find it's disingenuous to the efforts that the city started out being and doing.
Commissioners, any other comments on concerns with the criteria being met? And the commission finds the criteria is met with one finding that the criteria is not met. Page 16, item number B, optimize the development of vacant employment land. Again, the findings are that the application narrative does not address policy A2, though the finding is that the proposal meets the policy. Proposed amendments meet this policy because allowing multifamily use in a portion of the Westlake Grove OC zone will allow the redevelopment of a city-owned construction and staging site after completion of Boones Ferry Road improvement project. Additionally, revitalizing the site with a new use will help support existing commercial uses within the Westlake Grove and Lake Grove Village Center. So again, the finding is that it's optimizing the development of vacant employment land. Commission finds that we unanimously find that the criteria is met. No dissenting. Policy 8, the designation of employment centers, and then the factors of the neighborhood villages, items 1 through 5. And the finding is that the application narrative does not address the policy A8C. Those staff finds the proposal is met. Again, citing that the site is within the Westlake Grove neighborhood village, and the proposal accommodates mixed-use development by adding multifamily residential and allowed use in the Westlake Grove OC zone. Any?
I have to say that number 5, developed at a scale and in character with the immediately surrounding residential area. I think it's in conflict with that because of its density.
Thank you. Commissioners Fisher or Vice Chair Pepe, any comments? None?
I would agree. I would agree with Commissioner Lake on that.
All right, so any others? Commissioner Stewart?
With regard to item number 3, or III, served by minor arterial roads, is West Sunset Drive considered is that considered a minor arterial road?
No, it's not an arterial. I don't even believe it's a collector.
Okay.
I'll look that up
minor-
so we can give you an
okay.
accurate answer. It's
I
not
guess
an
I guess where I'm going is I remember reading in the Westlake Grove design overlay or something having to do with that. There's this thing about skinny streets. Am I thinking of something else, or is there some sort of skinny street standard within that?
Within the Westlake Grove Design
Grove.
District, the district has unique standards both for the Boones Ferry Road frontage and for the cross streets, in this case Sunset. And are they skinnier, are they narrower than other collector streets? I'm not sure.
Okay, I'm sorry. Maybe I'm misremembering something.
Functional street. Let me give you an answer to your first question, Commissioner Phil.
But while he's looking at that, I think the question for the commission is whether the additional use changes the neighborhood village ability to, because it presumably already is, it's a neighborhood village, whether it's comprised of commercial and mixed-use zones that accommodate commercial uses, et cetera, whether it supply service to the market area, do these additional, does that
Right.
additional
No,
use?
I have no issue with those
Yeah.
statements. It just, one of these statements made me think of something I thought I had read. Because I was gonna tie it back into this transportation and traffic discussion, but if it doesn't exist, then don't worry about it.
So Commissioner Stewart, you feel the criteria is met? Commissioners,
Yes.
I think Pepe, did you reply no?
Correct.
Bless you, Pepe, yeah, no. Commissioner Fisher? Commissioner Fisher, we can't hear you.
Commissioner Fisher with us?
No, I have no further
Right.
questions.
I think then the commission finds 4-2 that the criteria is met. I'll vote yes, 4-2.
Chair, in response to Commissioner Stewart's question, that West Sunset does show up as a collector street, if I'm reading this correctly, on the city's functional classification.
So it's not a collector.
It's not an arterial. I believe it's a collector.
Oh, it is a collector, okay.
We don't know if it's neighborhood or major collector.
Yeah, I'm
But
trying to
kind of
verify that.
Somewhat irrelevant, but.
All right, policy B1, A through J. A provides required public facilities and services. B addresses impacts such as noise, traffic, and visual aesthetics. C, complying with the design and aesthetic standards to promote compatibility with Lake Oswego's community character. And the findings is that no development is proposed with this application. Compliance with the design standards will be addressed at the time of review. So I think those have been addressed.
Chair Heap, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I need to correct myself. West Sunset is not a collector or an arterial. The closest collector street is Washington Court. So I was misreading that. I'm sorry.
All right, thank you, Director Siegel. Move to preserving natural resources and providing required open space. Again, no development is proposed, so that would be addressed during redevelopment. I'll just kind of read through these. Addressing the adequacy of all transportation modes to, from, and within the development. No development is again proposed. When the redevelopment is actually done, the proposed code amendments, the adequacy of transportation will be addressed under the existing development standards. And then item number F, maintaining a street system which provides efficient connections to transportation corridors, other activity centers, including employment centers, town centers, neighborhood villages, and commercial corners. Finding the code amendments allow the opportunity for multifamily housing on the site. The code amendments do not alter the existing street system. Any future development subject to a development review application will be required under the CDC, the Community Development Code, to provide street frontage improvements on Boones Ferry, West Sunset Drive, in conformance with the transportation system plan. And I'll just read through the page 17 and we can comment that if we have any specific issues. So item number G, maintaining safe and convenient pedestrian, bicycle, and transit facilities. Promoting, item number H, promoting the efficient use of land by providing adequate parking. I know Commissioner Phillips, you were asking about parking, maintaining safe and convenient pedestrian, bicycle, and transit facilities, amenities that support efficient movements of people to and from the site. Excuse me, I think I went back. Item H was the one that said promoting efficient use of land, providing adequate parking for customers and employees according to the national transportation standards. Again, the finding here is allowing multifamily use would add residents, not customers and employees. Therefore, the policy is not applicable, and this is promoting the adequate parking for customers and employees in particular. Item number I, minimizing the impacts of traffic generating on adjoining neighborhoods by routing traffic to major collectors. The traffic impacts of future development would be minimized through a review of the development application and would be subject to the requirement of the code identified there with the traffic impact study in the Westlake Grove Design District, which contains specific standards for managing access onto West Sunset Drive and Boones Ferry. Item number J, promoting shared streets, parking facilities, and pedestrian connections with other businesses to provide more applicable, more developable land area and reduce traffic congestion, parking, and safety concerns. The community development contains standards requiring shared street access and parking facilities and pedestrian connectivities. These standards would be applied at the time of development review. So that was everything on page 17. Is there any of those criteria and findings that the commission wishes to find was not met?
Same old song, traffic and bicycle and pedestrian safety along West Sunset, and that it's not neither a feeder street nor a main arterial, and it's just barely a street. And routing traffic through that neighborhood has got a lot of impact that hasn't been studied, and I guess it's going to be studied down the road. So I guess it's a moot point whether we approve it or not.
Right, so,
Is that a yes or a no? That's a no.
so you believe the criteria, any specific one that you would like to call out? Is it?
H and G and H. And I guess.
Right.
G, H, and I.
Commissioners? Commissioner Phillips?
Yeah, I'm having trouble with H and J, but I'm not going to expand on it. I just simply don't believe, regardless of whether it goes to the next group during the development review, I just don't believe, I'm certain almost, that you can't build this type of unit and have parking that can be put in that facility, near that facility, unless you go underground, which they say they simply won't do. Okay, commercially it makes no sense. So, you know, I'm at a loss to I won't use the word rubber stamp. I can understand what the city is saying here, but I simply don't believe that the development review process will be able to solve the problem. So why would I vote for something that I inherently know won't work? Okay.
Commissioner Phillips.
So, yes, I vote no.
Just a point of clarification on item number H. I think what you're referring to mostly was the parking, if that's correct. And item number H specifically refers to, parking for customers and employees. And this is a multifamily development, it's not customers and employees. But maybe item number J is promoting shared street access, parking facilities, and pedestrian connections. So item number J maybe is where your concern is at with.
Not applicable then? Maybe it shouldn't.
Item number J may be more applicable for, I think, what you're raising concerned about. Item number 8.
I'm fine with, I don't particularly care which one we pick here. I'm not voting for that parking problem, okay?
Okay. So it sounds like then.
J is fine,
okay.
Yeah.
Commissioners, Stewart?
I think it's met.
Anything? Commissioner Fisher or Vice Chair Pepe? Commissioner Fisher?
I think it's met, and I really would question, I don't believe that, right? You're probably right. I mean, and your belief is based on a gut feeling, but it seems to me our job is to look at what studies can be done that grounded in facts, not what I believe. I believe what you believe. That doesn't make a decision. I really would urge us to look at, what studies are done, and I think you agree that whatever study the city did, at least they tried to prove it. So I'm going to vote yes. I'm sorry.
Commissioner or Vice Chair Pepe, sorry.
With all due respect to Commissioner Fisher, I understand where he's coming from. At the same time, you have to look at whether or not it was the most appropriate study that was done with respect to the task at hand. And I don't think the most appropriate studies have been done. And based on that, I would vote no.
And again, Commissioners, sorry, I covered a broad page, so I think we're referring specifically to item J, is that correct, or are there other ones?
I would also, I would include H in there as well. While it talks about customers and employees, am I correct on that?
Yeah, it says allowing multifamily use would add residents, not customers or employees. So
I would.
I think like item number H we're saying is not applicable, but you're thinking it would apply.
No, I would disagree with that from the standpoint of employees. You could have someone who's coming in and helping if someone needs assistance with elderly and assisted living, and or helping to maintain the complex, whether that's landscapers or HVAC. It could also mean individuals coming in to help clean different units. So I think that spillover will happen into the neighborhood, and I don't know that that's necessarily been accounted for in the parking.
All right, I think, are we losing track of the criteria? Should we come back and maybe go through individually, because I think we're covering too many. So items on page 17, items D, preserving natural resources and providing required open space. Any, none. Item E, addressing the adequacy of all transportation modes to and from and within the development. Anyone wish to state that the criteria is not met? No. Item F, maintaining a street system which provides efficient connections to the transportation corridors and other activity centers, including employment centers, town centers, neighborhood villages, and commercial corners. Any commissioners wish to state the criteria has not been met? None. And then I think here's where we come to the ones. So item number G, maintaining safe and convenient pedestrian, bicycle, and transit facility amenities that support efficient movement of people to and from the site.
That one I do not approve.
Any other commissioners?
I would vote no.
2. All right. Item,
Here,
You're talking about the bicycles and the
G,
pedestrian and.
yes.
Consistent with, I believe I've been consistent on this, I believe the traffic study, I think that's a doable thing. I think that could be done correctly. So I'm fine with that.
Vice Chair Pepe on item number G.
Where's Fisher?
I apologize. I had a brief interruption in the internet. Was there a comment that was made?
Oh, no, just the criteria being met on item number G, maintaining safe.
No.
No. Fisher was, I believe, yes, no?
Commissioner, yes, my answer is yes, but Commissioner Phillips said it exactly. He said he believes that it could be met. And so it seems to me that's enough rationale right there.
Right, I'll vote yes, so I think that was 4-2. Item H, promoting efficient use of land by providing adequate parking for customers and employees. I think this is where Vice Chair Pepe was commenting, he thinks employees do apply. So criteria met. The commissioners wanting to vote and no, the criteria is not met.
I don't believe it's met.
Okay, we're talking G now for whether.
I think H, we moved on to H.
H,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
sorry, you're right. Okay, so when you addressed this before, I was talking about parking, but after Commissioner Pepe noted that there will be employees, there'll be a manager, there'll be a security team, there'll be people that will need to park, whether they use the visitors or not. So I would not vote for that, no. If employees will be on site, then I have the same problem with the parking.
You don't feel like there will be adequate parking for customers and employees?
Keep in mind the existing code.
I'm
The existing
adding
code
it all.
requires parking for all commercial uses.
I'm saying parking in general. I don't believe that they can build a multi-purpose facility with 50 some odd units and that land and have the parking that's going to be needed for the residents. And now you're adding employees to it also, which there will be some employees regardless. All right, so I link them two together. I agree with your idea of customers. They're not customers probably, but, you know, employees will be on site. So I'm having trouble with JNH now based upon what Mr. Pape said.
Right. Vice Chair Pepe?
Yeah, Director Siegel was making a comment on something that Commissioner Phillips was saying, and I didn't catch what Director Siegel was trying to communicate. If you wouldn't mind repeating that.
Thank you, Commissioner Pape. I was just observing that the code requires a certain amount of parking for commercial uses which are currently allowed by the zoning on the site, OC zoning, whether it's restaurants, which have a very high trip generation rate and require quite a bit of parking, or office space. So just, I want you to, if in case it isn't already clear, that the code amendments are not taking those commercial uses off the table, they're adding multifamily to the list of uses that are permissible. And the parking requirements address all of those.
Right.
I know we got a lot to do, but
Thank you.
I got a basic question that maybe we can resolve all these no's and yeses all at once, okay? And say something, or do
Sure,
you want
go
to keep going? Okay, so if I understood Evan the other night when we were talking, when I was here and I heard you talk, there was a suggestion, okay, it's pretty clear that we got a lot of no's in here on individual items, okay? But if I understand, Evan, at some point, or we have to vote, 7 of us, 6 of us have to vote yes or no to make this code recommendation. But we need to do that tonight. Is that correct?
Correct.
So it seems to me, and what Evan said the other night, maybe a resolution to this is to note these things to the city council that we simply don't believe some of this is doable under your code.
Commissioner Phillips, I believe that's what we're trying to do. That's why we're going through the
Okay,
criteria.
perfect,
And the purpose of going through the
I didn't
criteria is
understand
to provide
the- I didn't
that
understand
feedback
the
to
end
council.
result.
Yes.
I didn't understand the end.
Otherwise, we just take a vote and say that we approve it or not, but that wouldn't be very helpful to the council. What's helpful to the council is for us to go through the criteria, and where the commissioners, think there's issues, to identify that. Yes, so that's the process we're following. So try to speed it up a little bit. So I think on item H, was that, then the Commissioner Leak, you were,
No.
no, so that would be 3, I'd vote yes, 3-3.
Okay.
Item number I, minimizing the impacts of traffic generated on adjoining neighborhoods by routing traffic to major collectors.
I'm a no.
Commissioner Leak, just share your concern and maybe your disagreement with the finding?
I just feel that, again, because the DRC hasn't got us anything in front of it, that they haven't evaluated that, and I think the traffic study was very weak and did not address the concerns of the neighborhood of the spillover of the traffic into their poorly maintained streets.
Thank you. Any other no's to meeting the criteria?
No.
Commissioner Pepe? Any others? I'll vote yes. Then it's 4-2. Criteria is met. Correct. Promoting shared street access, parking facilities, and pedestrian connections. Item number J.
I guess it's met because one complex has to have access to the next one. So Renaissance parking lot will be accessible to the people from this parking. Is that accurate? Is that what that means? Whoever is next door to it, you don't just have a parking lot that ends, but the parking lot's contiguous to each other?
Yeah, it's a guideline so that when adjacent parcels redevelop, they each make an effort to plan for a connection. It's not always possible, but when it is, the code directs that to happen. But it's, there's more than just one property next door. I think to the west, there are a couple of properties that,
In between?
yeah,
Okay,
that line
thank
up.
you. I'm good with that.
Okay. Commissioners, anyone?
Got his hand up.
Oh, sorry. Was it Vice Chair Pepe? Did you have?
I'm good. I'm good.
Okay.
Thanks.
So any other commissioners wish to vote that the criteria is not met?
Which one?
We're on item number J, promoting the shared street. You're a no. Any others? So that's one, no. Excuse me, Vice Chair Pepe, I didn't.
My vote is no.
No, two no's.
I'm good.
So 4-2, the criteria is met. All right, move on to page 18. Policies, I'll just kind of, in order to speed up a little bit here, I'll read the three policies. So B1, B2, B3, and policy C1. B1, provide land use patterns, promote public and private development. B2, provide street and frontage improvements such as dedicated facilities, landscaping, and street lighting, and permit amenities such as benches, shelters, encourage walking and biking as viable travel modes along, particularly along corridors that serve the primary transit network and employment centers, town centers, and neighborhood villages. B3, require development, redevelopment, public transportation improvement that accommodate pedestrian, bicycle, transit use, particularly in areas with identified gaps in transportation system and all employment centers, town centers. In C1, maintain arterial and major collector street intersection at a level of service E or better during peak hours. So let's just go policy B1. Any commissioners wish to state the criteria has not been met?
Nope, good.
We're all good? So unanimous. But B2, saying the application narrative does not address policy B2, although staff finds the proposal does not conflict with the policy. Any commissioners wish to disagree? No? We're finding that the criteria is met. Policy B3, required development, redevelopment. Finding is the application narrative does not address the above policy, though staff finds the proposal meets this policy. See finding under policy B2 above. Same rationale as policy B2. Good. Policy C1, finding the application does not address the policy C1, though staff finds the proposal meets the policy. This code amendment allows the opportunity for redevelopment on the site with multifamily housing. Code requirements regarding traffic studies and mitigation of development provide existing tools to require future development to mitigate its traffic impacts, thus assuring the policy is met. Again, I think a lot of discussion tonight about the role of the development review process, and that that's when those will be addressed. Again, do commissioners want to vote that the criteria is not met on policy C1?
I'm not sure what level
Or
of
should it
service
B3?
LOSE is during peak hours, so I can't say that it's been met or not.
It's right before F.
If the commissioners have questions about that, our city engineer, Eric Rooney, is in the audience.
Well, City Engineer Rooney, would you like to give us a brief explanation of what the level of service E or better during peak hours really means?
So the commissioners, my name is Erica Rooney. I'm the city engineer, and so the level of service calculation is it's a standard used in the industry to measure basically the overall operations of a signalized intersection. So level of service A is, if you will, the best, kind of like on a grading scale, and it is more free flow and very little delay. The more delay that you get at an intersection, the worse the grade is. So level service F stands for failure, quite frankly, in that you might sit through 2 or 3 cycles of a signal before you actually got through the intersection. So it's not, I can't give you it's exactly 10 seconds delay or 15 seconds delay. It's a calculation based on incoming flows, delay, things like that that are taken in the field. So the level of service E that was mentioned, I believe it was, I don't have it in front of me, that what you're looking at,
It was E, yes.
is not the worst. It's not great, but it's not the worst. And we have several intersections that operate at level of service D and E during the peak hour. So we only do this during the peak hour, by the way. So in this case, the peak hour along Boones Ferry Road is typically in the afternoon, in the PM peak. Doesn't mean it's terrible all day long. As a matter of fact, you can go out there at this time of day and find that there's absolutely no delay and all the intersections are level of service A. So, but that is the industry standard, is to look at them during the PM peak and do that evaluation. Again, it's based off of counts that are collected, delay information that is collected in the field by the traffic engineers when they're doing the study.
But since West Sunset is not a major collector street intersection, how does this apply to what we're trying to determine?
Well, Boones Ferry Road, though, is a major street. It's a major arterial.
It's a major arterial.
It's a major arterial
But there's an intersection there at West Sunset,
with a signal.
right? Okay. Thank you.
So I have a question.
Sure.
So at the time of a development application, a traffic engineer would be required to study and rate that intersection, and probably one or two more near it, correct?
Absolutely. We typically will sit down during the pre-application process and determine an area of potential influence, usually going anywhere from a third to a quarter of a mile away, trying to figure out what the trip distribution might be, and then making sure that we look at those intersections as part of a fuller traffic analysis that would be presented during a development proposal. So again, if they come in for, whether they come in for a residential facility, be it 50 units or 40 units or whatever, be it that, or if they come in for restaurants or offices and small shops, maybe some small housing on top, they'll look at the mixture of the use, apply the appropriate trip generation based off of the Institute of Transportation Engineers Manual, often referred to as the IT Trip Generation Manual. They'll use those standards to determine what the counts would be, and they'll also look at the type of trips and the distribution, so to make sure that we go the right directions for those analysis for each of those intersections. But I would anticipate something on Boones Ferry Road. We'll usually have 3 to 5 intersections that we would look at more closely.
Okay, Commissioners, items on policy B3 and C1, are there any that wish to vote that the criteria is not met?
No, I'm good.
Vice Chair Pepe or Commissioner Fisher? You guys are good? Okay, so the Commission finds unanimous that the criteria is met on B3 and C1. I'll move on to page 19. Policy C6, require applicants for zone changes request conditional use permits to determine the resulting extent of impacts to the transportation system, provide mitigation deemed appropriate by the city to maintain transportation system efficiency. Staff finds that the policy is met. It says see discussion on C5. Any dissent? Commissioners feel the criteria is met, unanimous? All right. Policy C8, plan 20-minute neighborhoods to accommodate uses that efficiently meet many daily residential needs via short trips by any mode of travel. The application narrative does not address the above policy C8, though staff finds this proposal meets the policy. The opportunity for multifamily housing on the subject site would allow for efficient land use and redevelopment within a micro neighborhood where commercial uses have already served the local population and could serve residents of any future multifamily housing, which would be consistent with the goals of a 20-minute neighborhood. Any commissioners wish to find the criteria is not met? No, unanimous. Policy F2, mitigate the impacts of traffic on neighborhood collectors and higher classifications that bisect residential neighborhoods. The application narrative does not address the above policy F2, though staff finds the proposal does not conflict with the policy. Allowing for opportunity of multifamily housing on the site would not alter code requirements regarding traffic studies or mitigation of development. I think what we've talked about earlier was, there's a concern that we got to do, there's concern that there's, deeper traffic studies that are required, more analysis, but that, again, I think what's conveying here is that would be covered in our development review process. So any commissioners wish to find the criteria has not been met for policy F2. Commissioner Lee?
I feel it has not been met.
Any other commissioners' feedback on? So,
I don't think it's been met.
all right. Anybody else? So I find yes, it has been met, so 4-2 criteria has been met. And would it be sufficient to say the concern is over the traffic study, that there's not?
Huge, yeah.
All right. Policy G3, support the mixed-use development by designating locations for such uses and providing land use opportunities that encourage local job creation in order to reduce the number of locally generated regional commuting and shopping trips. The application narrative does not address, but staff finds the proposal meets the policy. Proposed amendments would create opportunity for mixed-use development by allowing multifamily residential housing along with permitted WLG-OC commercial uses. See also the policy C8 findings above. Commissioners, any commissioners wish to find the criteria has not been met?
I'm okay with it.
And I think when they talked about local job creation, I mean, we did hear testimony that, you know, some of the kind of targeted jobs that would fill the need would be support kind of a beginning fireman or policeman salary range would fit in with that. And so I thought that actually met up well. So everybody's good.
Yeah.
All right. Page 20, compliance with Metro Code, Title 7, Housing Choice. Again, the finding is that the Metro Code provision requires the city to adopt strategy and plans to address affordable housing. The commission wish to find the criteria is not met. Any commissioners?
No.
No? Unanimous? Item number D, compliance with the Transportation Planning Rule, OAR 66012-0060, talks about the statewide planning goal 12 for transportation, talks about the plan land use regulations, and then significantly affects the transportation facility if it would change the functional classification of an existing planned transportation facility, change standards of implementing a functional classification system, result in any of the effects listed. And continuing on to page 21, the reduction may diminish or completely eliminate the significant effect of the amendment. It talks A, B, and C, types of level of travel or access, degrade the performance of existing planned transportation facilities, degrade the performance of an existing planned transportation facility that is otherwise projected to not meet the performance standard. The finding is that the site is not within a multimodal mixed-use area as designated by Oregon Department of Transportation, and the proposed code amendments to allow multifamily housing as an additional use on the site, and the proposed map amendments do not affect existing standards and policies regarding access to and limited capacity impact to any transportation facility. It does talk about the application provides a traffic memo from Kittleson and Association dated in August 6th of 2020. That was Exhibit F-0002. Discusses the compliance of the proposed amendments with the TPR. The applicant's traffic engineer concluded that there are no TPR-related impacts associated with the amendments, and no further analysis should be required because the use of multifamily market rate housing trips would result in a decrease in daily trips and either a net decrease in combined weekday AM and PM peak hour trips as compared to a reasonable worst case scenario under the existing zoning. I think, again, that's where they were maybe giving an example of a daycare, and there's a lot of discussion on that. The West Sunset Drive Boones Ferry Road intersection currently meets the city's level of service standard and is projected to do so in the future per the transportation TSP, the Transportation Service Plan, I assume. Comments, commissioners? Do you feel this criteria has been met?
No.
In particular areas of concern, Commissioner Lee?
the traffic memo from Kittleson and Associates comparing it to a daycare during the week. I find that insufficient study. And again, I agree with Commissioner Pape that a more strategic, complete traffic study needs to be made for a 50-unit mixed residential unit complex. And I would also say I'm concerned that the West Sunset Drive Boones Ferry Road intersection meets the city's level of service. Well, the intersection does, but half a block away doesn't. So I have issue with that.
Thank you. Commissioners, any other comments on why they may feel the criteria is not met? Commissioner, Vice Chair Pepe, no?
No, I don't believe it's been, I don't believe the analysis was adequate.
Any others? Then the commission finds 4-2 that item number D, compliance with the transportation planning rule, has been met. We'll move on to 22, compliance with Oregon statewide planning goals. This is item number E. Talks about citizen involvement, land use planning, areas subject to natural hazards, economic development, goal 10, housing, and goal 12, transportation. Well, let me go back. Before goal 12, transportation, the finding is that the proposed amendments will not affect the city's, excuse me, let me see if I'm reset here. So we talked about goal 10, housing. And yeah, if we go back to goal 10, housing, the finding is that the proposed statewide planning goal 10 is to ensure the opportunity for the provision of adequate numbers of needed housing units, sufficient use of buildable land within urban growth boundaries to provide greater certainty in the development process so as to reduce the housing cost. I think if we go on, that then the finding is that the proposed amendments will not affect the city's overall residential land supply or compliance with metro housing rule. Yeah, I'm going from page 23 and just trying to call out a particular finding on the housing. I think it's mostly stated maybe at the top of 23 in the first paragraph. Although the finding seems to state more that what the purpose of the statewide planning goal 10 is than necessarily the finding. On page 23, let's just say, are there any concerns related to goal number 10, housing, that the criteria is not met? No. None? So the commission unanimously finds goal 10 on housing is met. And then on goal 12, transportation, goal 12 requires each community to provide a safe, convenient, and economic transportation system. The goal is implemented through the state transportation planning rule. See discussion in the section D above. The application narrative also provides findings in response to goal 12. Staff finds the goal is met. So comments on goal 12 of transportation? Good. Any commissioner wishes to find the criteria has not been met for goal 12? No? All right, I think we've covered then all of the specific criteria items and given feedback. So I think that now we'd move on to the next step, which is to deliberate and make a finding and recommendation on the overall application.
Just a question.
Sure, Commissioner Fisher.
The way we'll present it to the city council is that the planning commission has accepted all the conditions with the exception of, for example, F2, two commissioners feel that it's inadequate. How does this get presented to the planning commission? To the city council, I'm sorry.
Well, okay. We are at the stage in the deliberation as to whether or not there's a majority of the commission that would move a motion to recommend to the council to approve or to deny. Whichever motion, regardless of which way, it takes a majority. At this point, we have 6 commissioners that are eligible to vote. As you guys have gone through this, I've noted that I think there are two criteria that I saw 3-3. So I would invite the commission to revisit those. Then to Commissioner Fisher's question, I mean, ultimately, these preliminary, or these mini votes, if I can use that term, would be reflected in the minutes and can be reflected in the findings as to how the commission broke on it. But ultimately, it takes at least 4 votes to pass a recommendation to the council. So with that, I would suggest to the commission that perhaps you would revisit discussion on policy A1. That's the one I saw that I have that it was 3-3. And also on the one you just finished, it was under A1. B1 on your page 7, well, I'll just say it's page 17, subsection H. That was the efficient use of land by providing adequate parking for customers and employees according to national transportation standards. Those are the 2 that I saw broke 3-3. So unless somebody changes their vote, okay, then the consequence is we're at a 3-3, we can't pass the motion. And then the next step would be to enlist the services of Commissioner Simler to review the evidence and come back at the next meeting with his vote on, actually, he can zero in on those 2, but also can give his other comments, but it wouldn't sway the ultimate tally. And then we'd look for a final motion.
Thank you, Attorney Boone. So let's go back, maybe revisit policy A1. Thank you. That's what I was looking for.
That's page 7 of your staff report.
Yeah, policy A1 is to maintain land use regulation standards to promote compatibility between different development and existing and desired neighborhood character, minimize, item number C, minimize and or mitigate adverse traffic impacts generated by new development on adjacent neighborhoods, provide for the implementation of adopted neighborhood plans, provide for necessary public facilities and services, protect life and property from natural hazards, promote architectural and site design quality, increase the opportunities for alternate means of transportation. So I think some of the concerns were related to the compatibility between the development and existing desired neighborhood. So going back into this, the specific concerns were on, I believe, on item number A, and then potentially item number F, I believe, the protect the life and property from natural hazards. No? All right, so is it just mostly then item number B?
It was B and C.
Okay, B and C. I was referring to the maybe Commissioner Phillips' comments earlier where he generally talked about safety, but I think you're right, the overall commission was mostly, natural hazard maybe outside, not, it could be more the traffic.
Like thunderstorms and tornadoes, right?
Yeah,
Or water resources or wetlands.
okay.
And I guess I would just preface this policy by, again, the policy is to maintain the land use regulations and standards that do these things. So the question to the commission is whether the application as submitted means that the existing regulations do maintain land use regulations and standards that do this, because all the CDC was approved under the comprehensive plan. Okay? So the question is whether this amendment then would put it out of compliance with these, would no longer maintain land use regulations and standards that accomplish this. So is it the change of use that would result in no longer having land use regulations and standards that we have in the CDC that would accomplish these policies?
Commissioner Lee, go ahead.
So how does this change and the CDC's regulations overlap with the West Lake Road Design Development Plan?
The only difference that we were able to identify was the allowance of the 5-foot additional height for multifamily housing. That's really the only change in design or development standards. And then the addition, of course, of the 80-foot separation or setback for that from low density.
What about promoting compatibility between development and existing and desired neighborhood character?
Yeah, so Commissioner Leek, the addition of that 80-foot separation or setback from the building that has 5 feet of additional height,
That would be the one on the street, on the Boones Ferry.
that would just be any building that's constructed on the property would need to, if it were to use that 5 feet of additional height, that portion of the building would have to be set back at least 80 feet from low-density residential. So that's how, in our minds, we were looking at promoting compatibility.
Okay.
Commissioner Stewart?
So what is the separation otherwise, if it's not 80 feet?
Otherwise, there's actually a 0 setback in that zone, except I believe on Sunset there's a 6-foot setback. So the setbacks are very minimal in that district, and so this would be unusual, but we thought it was necessary.
So again, Commissioners, earlier vote was at 3-3. I forget which of the commissioners, I think Commissioner Lee, was it Commissioner Phillips? Were you voting that?
Okay, so if I understand it correctly, this was the first item out of the book. And
Yes.
I'm trying to figure out the consistency here to make sure I'm consistent on my approach. I was having trouble with C, Charlie, and F. And C was to mitigate traffic impacts generated by the new development, okay? And then F, we were looking at that, you kind of identified that. My concern was the kids not having a place to play. That's certainly a concern, but kids have lived in apartment complexes and buildings all their lives, and they find a place, and there's a park not too far away from there, Beluga, I think, not too. So I'm going to drop my objection to F because I don't think it's that significant, okay? And I'm also going to drop my objection to C because if you remember later on when it talked about traffic, I'd agreed that the people that do the traffic are more knowledgeable about it than I am. And since they don't, and I don't disagree with the other two commissioners that talk about needing a more detailed study. I don't disagree with that. I think it is needed, but I don't believe it's possible to do right now either, okay? So, and this lady here, she was very clear on how it works. So I'm going to drop my objections to the two that I had, and because it says maintain land use regulations and standards, and I voted many times throughout this document affirmative, even though I didn't believe some of them were, I think it's doable, but this is probably not the stage to make it doable. Okay, so I'm going to vote yes at that. I'm going to change my vote because, and I apologize for not understanding how this process worked, and it happened to be the first one, and I was voting probably a little sooner than I should on these, okay, but I think I'm going to go back and be consistent, and I'll vote yes.
I think so. So my understanding is that on policy A1, we have then a vote of 4-2. Vice Chair Pepe, I see you would like to make a comment. Go ahead.
With respect to what Deputy Attorney Boone was talking about regarding the land use, and if we voted, or excuse me, A1 specifically points to land use, when it, I'm drawing a blank on the program or the code that you mentioned but I believe it was the overall code for Lake Oswego.
Well, the Community Development Code,
Community
Thank
development.
you.
Chapter 50.
CDC. When that was construed, was that done when the property that we're talking about was zoned in a different manner? Has it been rezoned since then?
What, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, Commissioner Happe, I don't believe this property has been rezoned, but there was a rezone, there were zone changes that were approved, I think in 2012 or 2013, and I can find that case if that's helpful, that redesignated some zoning on the other side of the street and reconfigured the intersection.
But what I thought you were asking, okay,
Sorry.
was the comprehensive plan was adopted in 2013. The Westlake Grove Design District, when this was zoned, WLG, was back in, I think, 1999, memory serves. I had just came to Lake Oswego then, so that's my first zone.
Okay, so what I'm trying to get to is currently how the property is zoned would fall in accordance with the CDC. If we rezone, how would the CDC have looked at this property had it been zoned the way that the city is trying to get it rezoned? Does that make sense?
I'm not following, I mean,
The CDC regulates pursuant to the comprehensive plan. So anytime the CDC changes, including this case, you look at the comprehensive plan to see if it's in alignment. So then this is a proposal to change both the comprehensive plan map and the zoning map and the text. It's the planning initiative is looking at policy and code.
Right, so the approval of this also changes the land use and the CDC, correct?
It changes the CDC to allow multifamily use. That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Right, so I think then we now have direction on policy A1, again, 4-2, so that is resolved. And then the next one, Attorney Boone, you were mentioning, was it B2?
B2, I think it's B2F, H is the one I have. Wait, let's see. Yes, on page 17, H, and that was the one promoting the efficient use of land by providing adequate parking for customers and employees according to national transportation standards. So provide opportunities for redevelopment in employment zones while having adequate parking for customers and employees according to national transportation standards.
And I think on this one, if I remember, there was a little bit of disagreement on that, whether it was, really relevant to customers and employees, and that, allowing multifamily would add residents, but would not be adding really customers and employees. And then, it would also be addressed at the time of review, again, when the development review process occurs. And the vote on it, Attorney Boone, was that 3-3 also?
That was 3-3. Leak, Pape, and Phillips, and the issue was, I think, to some degree about employees being there.
Yes,
That there, in
exactly,
fact, would be employees. That's the applicability question.
In fairness, my concern with the word employees, it ties into J, parking facilities in general. I mean, there's enough there for employees, I'm sure they can make that work. But you add that to the people that live there, 50 people with 50 cars, and probably some of them got 2, so you're talking 75, 80 cars in a place that's gonna have 50 parking spaces. They already said that. They can't make this work.
Okay.
But again, I think to that point, Commissioner Phillips, that we have the parking code that's in place, and the parking code, it would have to be met to ensure that, you know, the development could go forward. So, you know, there's a check in the process with our existing development code.
I understand the code, and I understand that I'm not the expert on the code, okay? I agree to that, okay? And I'm perfectly fine with voting to let this go forward if it's spelled out in detail exactly what I'm trying to say to the city council, that they've got to look at this before they start putting out a request for proposals, because if you can't do it, okay, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe they can figure a way to do it, but if they can't do it, the city council needs to know up front before they start getting requests for proposals and they find out, oh, we need 80 parking spots and we only got room for 50, okay? That's all I'm saying. I don't care how we get this. I'm all for moving forward. I want to get things done, okay? But I want my concerns spelled out to the city council so it's very clear before they start sending out requests for proposals to build something here.
Thank you. Commissioner Stewart?
So putting the code aside a second, maybe this scenario is a little bit more palatable. So if you think of mixed use and the idea of a mixed use, what a lot of times happen is that you can have what they call shared parking in a mixed use development. And the reason you can do that is there's some uses that require the parking during the day, and then there's some uses that primarily require the parking at night. And so that's how you get residential and office, or residential and restaurant together, because the residential will use the parking generally at night in the early morning. The restaurant will use it during the day. And so those parking spaces sometimes get freed up. So in the same vein, you can look at this similarly in that these employees, whether they're maintenance workers or leasing agents or things, or things of that nature, would use those parking spaces during the day, during working hours, when maybe some of the residential spaces would be available because those people go to work. So, I mean, maybe look at it that way. It's not that necessarily you need, X plus Y. Maybe the Y number of spaces is absorbed in the X more.
But you're taking that at the value that it will be mixed use as opposed to.
No, it's not really mixed. No, what I'm equating,
residential.
but what I'm equating it to is that it's not a mixed use development, it's a mix of uses, right? So residential use
So
and
the
somebody.
HVAC guy is going to come at 8 in the morning, he'll be gone by 10 in the morning.
Well, leasing,
So,
look at
yeah.
a leasing agent. A leasing agent doesn't work overnight, they work during the day, and they'll probably have a leasing agent on site.
Right.
But that person will be there when probably there's parking available because there'll be people that go to work.
Just as a point of order, I wonder if I can
Well,
interject here.
I mean, I told
Attorney Boone for comment.
The shared parking is a way to get to the minimum parking standard required under the development code. Okay, I mean, you can count the bank's parking because they're only open during the daytime for residential, if your shared parking works just right. So I think the real question I guess I have for Commissioner Phillips, since the question, this is a locational, a site-specific rezone. And I hear you raising questions about the parking standard being applied to multifamily dwellings, sort of regardless of where it's sited. It could be in a R0 site, which is for multifamily housing, because what I hear you saying is you're not sure that the parking standard as adopted captures the parking from a multifamily dwelling.
I'm not an expert on multifamily parking, okay? However, I know how to read what was said there. And they got 50-something units, and they got 52 parking spaces, okay? And 15 of them, I believe, had to be set aside for visitors. And I've lived in apartment complexes. I've lived where people, and you got your assigned parking spot, or in this case, you probably wouldn't have, they said, okay? And, you pull out in the morning and you go off to the supermarket and you come back and somebody's in your parking spot.
Okay, so I just wanted to understand for the record
right.
here, to the council, since to understand what your rationale, what your thinking is.
Right.
Because what I hear is even a application that's compliant on the parking standard, you feel would not meet this standard, not because of its location, but because of its type of use, and that the parking standard doesn't go far enough.
Exactly.
Okay.
I can't disagree with what you're saying, okay?
Okay, thank you.
I just know the biggest fights I've ever seen in my life, living in apartment complexes, has always been over parking, okay? In fact, I got a note on my window one day, so.
So I would just add, and this is for maybe a follow-up discussion, if the commission were interested in exploring it, that's a policy issue. And so that's, what the planning commission does routinely is get input from the community on, code provisions that you think need to be reviewed or possibly replaced. And so, if the commission is, wanting to look at parking standards, it's obviously a much larger exercise. It's a legislative question, but that's something that you could prioritize outside of this, this application, as a
Correct,
policy matter.
Thank you, Director Siegel. So that's
I'm sorry?
I think Director Siegel's making an excellent point there that, part of what the Planning Commission does is we periodically review and get input from the community and then take direction from council on, are there certain development code standards that we think need to be reviewed and maybe enhanced. And it sounds like part of your concern is just the underlying parking related code. And so if we did, indeed that's identified as something concerning, we come back and look at that, with the council's approval, we could come back and look at the parking code and see if there's improvements that we can make to that.
I wasn't the only one that voted no on this, right?
That's
Okay.
correct.
So I'm amenable to moving forward and finding a solution. I just wanted,
Well, the only way you can note that is by saying no.
I'm sorry?
The only way you can move forward and have them know that
It
you
appears that may be the only one.
have to stand your ground and believe in what you believe in or not.
Chair Heap also wanted to just point out that in the study that was part of the application and that modeled 52 units, including a distribution for, I think, a roughly even distribution of studio apartments, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, just for modeling purposes. And the code today requires 68 parking spaces for those 52 units. And that's not, there's no discount for, transit or mixed use or anything like that. That's the straight code. So anyway, I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Commissioner, Vice Chair Pepe, were you the other one, I think, that had concerns?
Yes. They haven't changed.
Commissioner Phillips, any final thoughts? Again,
I'm going to have to stick with the vote no until I hear some way that I could move this forward, and I'm clear that it's going to be dealt with, and code's not enough for me on this. Okay.
Attorney Boone, question. We mentioned that we may be able to include Commissioner Simler in a vote. Could we include Commissioner Simler?
Well, not at this point, because he has not reviewed the entire record.
So we'd have to continue.
So we
Well,
would,
there's 7 of us.
we would continue the hearing for deliberation purposes, and then Commissioner Simler would review the record, and then weigh in on all of the criteria, finding some you may agree with and some not. At this point, I think if it's 4-2, so even if you came in on the 2 side, it'd still be 4-3, so that would make a difference relative to those criteria. Although, again, I want to point out that this matter is going to the council, so the commission's position, closely divided, should be carried through to the council. So,
Thank you. Vice Chair Pepe?
Help me understand how this more than likely plays out. Most all of what we just went through except for, actually all of it except for what we're just talking about now on item H, has been approved, whether it was unanimous or 5-1, 4-2, has been approved. I don't see how this doesn't go forward.
Well, there has to be a motion to recommend approval or denial. Okay? And then
Right.
within that findings, the straw polls relative to the specific criteria will be contained, so the commission, so the council, will have a feeling on where the splits are, where they need to pay particular attention. But in order to move it forward, there has to be a majority motion.
And that's independent of the individual criteria. So if on a
Right.
specific criteria, there's a tie, it's okay.
Right.
So I think we've discussed it. Would somebody like to make a motion to either approve or deny the applicant's request for rezoning?
To Commissioner Pape's, I think, question in there is, if you vote to approve, that means you vote to find that all of the criteria are met. If you vote to deny, that means you found that at least one of the criteria is not met. Okay? I mean, you have to meet all the criteria if you're going to vote to approve.
And if there is a vote to deny, what then happens to the applicant in this process?
Well, it's the recommendation to the city council to deny the application. This is not like the DRC where it stops unless there's an appeal.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Lee?
I would hypothesize that should we vote to deny, that city council will say, if they listen to our meetings, that they understand the reluctance of the very narrow part that we don't approve of, and will go forward with the application regardless of our denial. But they hopefully would focus on the traffic issues that we have reiterated time and time again.
Right, so would somebody like to make a motion? Commissioner Stewart?
I will move to approve I guess it'd be items 1 through 3 in the applicant's request based on the approval criteria is being met. Does that make sense?
Maybe could I suggest maybe a different wording to approve the application based upon the applicable standards and criteria and the evidence and testimony in the record. Motion would be to approve the zoning application.
Right, and that's inclusive of items 1 through 3 on page 1.
That's correct.
Yes.
You're doing all
So
of those three
you get
items.
the idea.
Question?
Commissioner Fisher?
Again,
Well, there's a motion, is there a second?
I second.
So there's a second, now discussion on the motion. Commissioner Fisher, I believe you have a question.
this is on it was more procedural. If we forward that we've approved of this thing, does the council get to hear that there was dissent or that there were?
Well, yes, regardless of whether it gets motion to approve or deny, I said the findings, I think, as indicated, will contain the straw poll relative to the various criteria. And then the minutes of this meeting, the video minutes, go to the council as well. So they're able to see and hear the discussion.
Is it possible in the motion to indicate that we approve with the exception of?
Well, no, if you have an exception, then you would vote to deny for that reason.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion on the motion? Commissioner Stewart?
I would like to just throw just a comment out as part of this. I am going to vote to approve it, but I think there might have been at least one or two avenues that might have sort of made this all easier and more palatable to us. One of which, there was never really any discussion about, you know, in terms of the zone change, what if everything became neighborhood commercial, right? Which, you know, that sort of zone is typically on a commercial corner next to a residential neighborhood. You know, we see it at Bryan and Lakeview, Jefferson, Kingsgate, Jean and Lakeview, places like that. You know, multifamily is allowed outright, as far as I know. 40-foot height limit is allowed, so we wouldn't be having to ask for a 5-foot height exception. It just seems like it would have been a much cleaner approach instead of, you know, the comment I made earlier where, you know, we already have a very complicated design overlay that's about to get more complicated. So I think there's the need to do what staff is asking to do. I just, you know, I just wish maybe another approach would have been taken, but I do support the application.
Thank you, Commissioner Stewart. Vice Chair Pepe or Commissioner Fisher, any comments? None? Commissioner Phillips?
Okay, so if I understand correctly, we're going to vote here, recommended approval, and, you know, but either way, it seems like it's semantics. Unless one of us has had an epiphany, it's going to be a tie vote. What happens after that? Did I miss something?
I think we could look at then continuing and getting, Commissioner Sumler's.
Okay, so the motion to approve or deny is really, it doesn't matter which one the motion is.
Well, yeah, that's because if it's 4-2, we're done.
Right.
It's 3-3.
Okay, all right, I understand what you're saying, okay, but, all right,
The
thank you.
city council is scarce.
Commissioner Lee, can you turn your microphone on? We can't. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I just
It
said.
sounded like a great conversation, but we couldn't hear.
I just said, I was explaining that Commissioner Semler would be the tiebreaker if it were a 3-3 vote. If tonight we voted 4-2 or 5-1, then it would move forward without having to come back.
And I think during that process, during the continued, Commissioner could change their opinion too, so the vote could change. My understanding is correct, Attorney Boone? Yes.
Well, yes, this is actually a motion to direct staff to prepare, it's a tentative decision directing staff to prepare findings, which you'll then have the written findings on, which you'll then vote on. So you can change your opinion, although of course staff doesn't like that, because then that means we have to write the findings a whole different way. You know, if you're the critical swing vote, you know, that goes the other way. And then we have to continue again in order to write those findings, so.
All right, shall we take the vote?
It's happened, though. I mean, so-
Cyrus, would you please call roll?
Fisher,
Yes.
Heap,
Yes?
Leek,
No.
Pape,
No.
Phillips,
No.
Stewart.
Yes.
So I believe it's a tie, so then the commission would like to continue and then ask Commissioner Simler to review the testimony and then come back and we'll take another vote. All right. So,
Some homework.
all right, so that'll conclude tonight then for the deliberation. We'll continue as discussed. And then I'd like to move on to the next agenda items. I think, looking for my agenda, I think the next item was, thank you.
Yeah,
Was the work session and the flood hazard overlay. Obviously, we ran late tonight, and so I'd like to defer that to the next meeting or future meeting. I think I'll work with staff to set the date on when
Yeah,
that's best.
if possible, we would ask that that be continued to the next meeting, the first
Okay.
meeting in August. It's a set of regulations that were required by FEMA to develop, and it is on a schedule for adoption. So,
Okay. Commissioners, any comments? Say we agree for that next meeting. And then item number 8, other business, nomination, election of chair and vice chair for the fiscal year. Is there anybody that would like to make nominations?
I nominate you and Vice Chair Pepe.
Is there anyone else?
Well, first of all, I second that motion.
Any further nominations? I think we'll proceed then on a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? None. Abstain, none. So the elections are complete. Schedule review, any additional information for the schedule review tonight?
no other information. I think you just got the review.
Okay. Right, so meeting adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.